Chapter 295. The trees in the square near the restaurant looked as if they had been ravaged by a tornado. Several of them were broken, and there were traces of a battle everywhere. It had been a while since the Aden Square had seen such a devastating battle between beings of at least the 7th tier, which meant that it had to be a battle between beings of the 7th tier or higher. Fortunately, my precious disciple is fine. The carriage stopped, and Crassus lifted the curtain and came out. Seeing Amy standing at the entrance of the restaurant, his face relaxed a little. He looked past Julian and saw the werewolf being beaten by Sargeras with a folding chair. Crassus narrowed his eyes. It seemed that the battle was over. Everyone's attention was focused on the entrance of the restaurant, and no one noticed the black carriage coming from behind. Hearing Crassus' words, Brandley breathed a sigh of relief. He was most worried that something had happened to Amy. If something had happened to Amy, Crassus and Julian would be angry. The damage caused by 2 10th-tier great magic casters would be unimaginable in this corner of the Aden Square. Awoo! At this moment, Anthem suddenly let out a mournful howl, and the wolf fur on his body almost all turned blood red in an instant. Accompanied by the crisp sound of bones crisscrossing, his body, which was already more than 3 meters tall, grew by half a meter again. He raised his paw and slapped the folding chair that Sargeras was waving at him. Sparks flew, and Sargeras was forced back a few steps by the sudden increase in strength. Since this is the city of chaos, it should be chaotic. Since you all want to die, I'll fulfill your wishes. Anham stood up. Red spikes protruded from his back, as if he was carrying 2 rows of flags on his back. Blood oozed out of his body, forming a layer of red blood mist outside his body. The smell of blood permeated the air, and the air was filled with the thick smell of blood. Awoo! The eyes of the other werewolves, who were being suppressed and beaten up, also turned blood red. Their auras suddenly increased, and they all struggled to jump up. Some of them crazily slapped away the surrounding lava demons, and stared straight at the customers in the restaurant with their scarlet eyes. Werewolf warriors, kill them all. Use their blood to make up for the damage caused by the madness. Anthem waved his hand in the direction of the restaurant, and said coldly, "Kill." As soon as his voice fell, he stepped forward and turned into a blood-red wolf with spikes on his back. He pounced on the floor-to-ceiling window of the restaurant, and the rocks under his feet shattered instantly. He was like a heavy truck that accelerated to the extreme in an instant. Kill! The werewolves also squeezed out a word from their mouths. At the same time, they transformed into giant wolves and pounced toward the restaurant's entrance and into the restaurant. Burning essence blood to go berserk would cause irreversible damage to the body, so these people deserved to die. They had to use their blood to replenish the weakness after going berserk. This. The customers in the restaurant thought that everything had been settled, but now they saw the blood-red wolf that suddenly broke free and pounced on the restaurant with its mouth wide open. Its ferocious teeth could be clearly seen through the transparent floor-to-ceiling window. Their faces changed dramatically, and some timid customers screamed, completely stunned. Oh, no! Sargeras's face also changed, and he tried to catch up with the wolf with his folding chair. He didn't expect that this werewolf could enter a more advanced state of madness, and increase his strength to the extreme in a short time. He was much faster than him, and he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to stop him. Watch out! Sally also let loose a faint cry of surprise. She picked up Amy with one hand and wrapped her other arm around Yabamiya's waist as she leaped off to the side. Even she wasn't confident that she would be able to withstand an attack from the giant crimson wolf in its berserk state. The 6 blood-red wolves attacked the restaurant and the surrounding onlookers at the same time. The smell of blood wafted through the air, bringing with it a sense of despair. Most of the people present were ordinary people, or people who were far weaker than these wolves, so they didn't even have a chance to escape. Screams erupted from the chaotic crowd, and the terrified crowd tried to run away, even though they knew that they couldn't outrun the several-meter-long red wolves. The scene instantly descended into chaos. Weak races should be eliminated and become food, the blood-red wolf said cruelly. What a bunch of stubborn bastards. Meg sighed, and turned to look at Julian, who was standing in front of the magic potion shop not far away. It seemed that he had to do something in the end. The people in the restaurant could already see each and every one of the blood-red wolves that were pouncing toward the floor-to-ceiling window. They were all waiting for death in despair. The word chaos in Chaos City doesn't mean that. Right at this moment, a deep voice sounded like a clap of thunder in everyone's ears. A tall and thin figure lifted the curtain of a black horse-drawn carriage and extended a hand toward the restaurant's entrance. Bang! The blood-red wolf, which was transformed by Anthem, seemed to have hit an air wall. Its sharp claws and huge body with terrifying speed and power crashed into the air wall, and stopped less than 10 centimeters away from the floor-to-ceiling window. It looked like there was nothing there, but it seemed to be an unshakable iron mountain. Its head and body were directly pressed together by the strong inertia. Its blood-red eyes were wide open, and it looked at the frightened customers in the restaurant unwillingly. If it stretched out its claws again, these cowards would all be dead. Bang! 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 Another 5 dull sounds sounded in succession. An air wall appeared in front of each wolf out of thin air. The wolves crashed into it fiercely, but none of them could shake it, let alone cause any harm to others. I'm Novin. It's okay, you're all safe. Novin, who was standing on the horse-drawn carriage, raised his hand gently as he spoke in a warm voice. The people who had fallen to the ground in their panic seemed to have been picked up by a pair of invisible hands, and the people who were about to collide with one another were gently separated. Everyone was safely separated, and not a single person was injured. The crowd was still in shock, but when they heard the voice, they all looked toward the black horse-drawn carriage. After seeing Novin standing on the carriage, someone exclaimed in surprise, "It's Principal. It's Principal Novin. Principal. It's really Principal Novin." Everyone was relieved to hear that, and they all looked at Novin with surprise and joy on their faces. At the same time, they were also relieved that they had survived the ordeal. However, after seeing Novin, they didn't feel any panic at all. Principal is here, then we're safe. There was a burst of cheers in the restaurant. Everyone looked at the werewolf whose face was pressed against the floor-to-ceiling window, and their fear disappeared instantly. Who was Novin? The principal of Chaos School. He was also the principal of Chaos City. In Chaos City, he was a man who could stand shoulder to shoulder with the Lord of the Great Temple and the City Lord. In the eyes of most people, this principal, who had built Chaos School single-handedly, was even more revered and respected in their hearts. He was a 10th-tier magic caster, a gentle educator, the architect of equal order, and the guardian of Chaos City, Novin. Now that he was here, everything was fine. Take these fellows who have violated the laws of Chaos City back to the Great Temple, and punish them according to the law, Novin said to Brandy. Novin looked at Brandley as he made a grabbing motion, and the 6 giant crimson wolves that seemed to have been bound by a pair of invisible hands were forced back into their human forms. The bloodied werewolves were thrown in front of the inspectors, who had just arrived. They were all on the verge of death, and couldn't move at all. Translator, Henye Translations Editor, Henye Translations, ho ho. Anthem lay on the ground, looking unwillingly at Cece, who was lying at the entrance of the restaurant. Just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. The curse on the werewolves could be completely lifted. That damn chef, take them back to Bawtai prison. Brandy cast a spell himself, and bound the werewolves with magic ropes, and ordered the inspectors to take them away. I'm here to eat. I heard there's a good restaurant here. Novin disembarked from the horse-drawn carriage with a smile on his face as he listened to everyone's cheers. On the long street, the sand and gravel began to tremble before converging toward the craters on the ground. In the blink of an eye, the ground outside the restaurant had become flat and clean, as if nothing had happened at all. Chapter 296. The werewolf was suddenly subdued by a pair of invisible hands. The crowd erupted into cheers. The ground was restored in the blink of an eye. The situation had changed so quickly that even Meg, who was still waiting for Julian to make his move, was still in a daze. The giant crimson wolf closest to him had its claws less than half a meter away from his head. The smell of blood assailed his nostrils, but it crashed into an air wall that suddenly appeared, and was pinned to the wall. It was like a chick caught by an eagle, it couldn't even struggle. Meg didn't feel much fear. After all, he had fused with Meg Alex's memories. This werewolf was no different from an ordinary puppy. However, he didn't feel any subjective fear. Objectively speaking, this werewolf was still a great threat to him. Even if he had a cleaver in his hand, he most likely wouldn't be able to defeat it, so he didn't let his guard down. The strength of a 10th level Space Grand Magus is indeed extraordinary. Meg looked at the man who had controlled the situation with a wave of his hand, and calmed everyone down just by saying his name. In Chaos City, perhaps only the principal of Chaos School could do that. Meg was naturally happy to see this happen. After all, it wasn't a good thing for the restaurant's image to have this kind of thing happen at the restaurant's entrance. It would be even worse if it left a psychological scar on the customers. The corners of Mag's mouth curled up slightly when he saw Crossu and Mag alighting from the same horse-drawn carriage. Although it was more likely that his identity would be exposed if he came into direct contact with such a big shot, if he could establish a different image in the hearts of these big shots, they might become his greatest protection when someone suspected him in the future. No one would have thought that Meg Alex, who had shocked the world with his sword, would become a chef who could cook all kinds of delicacies, a designer who could invent the steam engine and push the entire continent into the Industrial Revolution, and a genius mathematician who popularized the decimal system. In fact, Meg already had a blueprint in his mind. Since it was inevitable to become famous, then this time, he would use another way to let the world know him as Meg, and not as the Dragon Slayer Knight, Alex. As for the recovery of his combat power, that was his greatest trump card. Before he could be sure that he could protect Amy from anyone, keeping a low profile was the best way to survive. Of course, if someone touched his bottom line, Meg felt that it would not be difficult to kill them. Sargeras, who was holding a folding chair with one hand, stared at the werewolves who had been shrunk back to their original forms. His mouth was wide open. If Crossu's fireball spell that repelled the giant dragon outside of Rodu was a display of strength, then Novin's ability to dispel the berserk state of the werewolf, who had broken through to the 8th tier, with a simple wave of his hand, made them feel an unknown sense of awe and fear. Boss. Keel, Mond, and the others were still in a daze. They didn't know why those crazy fellows suddenly became crippled. Flames rose from their bodies as they looked at Sargeras in confusion. Withdraw, withdraw. The battle is over. Sargeras was the first to come to his senses. He withdrew the flames on his body, and hid the folding chair behind his back at the same time. An honest and harmless smile appeared on his face. It was hard to imagine that he had just slapped a 7th-tier werewolf with a folding chair and sent him into a berserk state. Yes. The lava demons also retracted the flames on their bodies upon hearing that, and stood behind Sargeras. Although they didn't know what had just happened, they knew that the old man who had walked out from behind the crowd was definitely not a simple person to be able to cripple all those crazy fellows in an instant. At the entrance of the blacksmith's shop, Sally placed Amy and Yabamiya on the ground. Her first reaction was to get Amy and Yabamiya out of danger, but she didn't expect the situation to be under control so quickly. Principal Novin, the Master of Space, and the #1 spatial magic caster on the Norland continent. Sally looked at Novin with awe and veneration in her eyes. There weren't many 10th-tier great magic casters on the Norland continent, but there were at least a few in each race. Perhaps there weren't many who were renowned across the entire continent. Aside from Crassus, the Lord of Ice, and Julian, the Lord of Ice, the Master of Space, Novin was widely acknowledged as the #1 spatial magic caster. Sally had grown up listening to legends about them. She didn't expect to see not only Crassus and Julian, but also Novin after coming to Chaos City. For a magic caster, it was like seeing her idols, so she was naturally very excited. Yes, this is the one. Crassus made his way over to Amy's with a smile. Principal, these people. Branley asked as he pointed at Cece and Lulu, who were still lying on the ground, as well as Sargeras and the others, who were all looking up at the sky at a 45-degree angle, as if they hadn't done anything wrong. According to the rules, even if they hadn't done anything wrong, they still had to be brought back to understand the situation. Treat the injured first, then do the rest according to your rules. A hint of surprise appeared on Novin's face as he looked at Cece, who was lying on the ground, and the wooden tube in his hand froze slightly on her lower abdomen. Yes. Branley nodded before leading Bob forward. He wasn't proficient in healing magic, and with Bob's powers, he could only do some simple treatment. They're under my protection. Right at this moment, a hoarse voice sounded from behind the crowd, and a path of ice and frost that was around half a meter wide appeared beneath Julian's feet, extending toward the entrance of the restaurant. Cece and Lulu were both enshrouded within it, and the passers-by hurriedly stepped aside to make way for them. The snowy white frost instantly froze the blood on the ground, and at the same time, sealed their wounds. However, they weren't completely frozen solid. Both of them had lost too much blood, and were on the verge of fainting. Tears welled up in their eyes as they looked at one another from afar. What's going on? Branley's footsteps faltered upon seeing this. He looked at the hunchback Julian, and a slight headache welled up in his heart. They're under my protection. Crassus also pointed at Sargeras and the others with a smile, and said, I really admire those guys who know how to protect my disciples. Bazer, who was leading the group towards Sargeras and the others, also stopped in his tracks. He had witnessed the entire process with his own eyes, and he was also very appreciative of Sargeras and the others. If it weren't for them, Principal Novin most likely wouldn't have been able to take control of the situation. The outside of the restaurant instantly fell silent. The situation was completely under control, but things didn't seem to be going very smoothly. Master Half-Beard. Master Turtle. Can you save Big Sister Cece and Big Bear first? Chapter 297. What a powerful spatial magic wave. Is that person the legendary space manipulator? Elizabeth looked at Novin with awe in her eyes as she stood on the branch of a big tree at the side. The frost dragon's frost domain was also a type of spatial magic, so she was very sensitive to spatial magic fluctuations. The spell that Novin had just casually displayed had already far exceeded her knowledge. In fact, she felt that even her father might not have been able to reach such heights at his peak. Elizabeth looked to the side, and her eyes immediately settled on Yabamiya. Her eyes lit up at the sight of the dragon horns on her head, and she couldn't help but let loose a soft cry of surprise. Draconians weren't very common on the Norland continent. In contrast, giant dragons with lifespans of over 1,000 years rarely chose humans who had short lifespans as partners. Furthermore, due to the fragility of the human body, Draconians couldn't transform into dragons even if they had half of the dragon bloodline in their bodies. Draconians with dragon horns were the most common type of Draconians. Aside from that, they were no different from normal humans, and would never be able to transform into true giant dragons. In the past, Elizabeth wouldn't have been interested in a draconian. The proud dragons never acknowledged that draconians belonged to the dragon race. However, after seeing the things that her father had left behind, Elizabeth's thoughts changed slightly. In any case, that little girl had the same bloodline as her, so she could be considered her half-sister. In fact, she had never even met her father after she was born. Father said that she was 14 years old in the letter. The letter was written 3 years ago, so she should be around 17 years old now. She seems to be quite close in age. Elizabeth fell into deep thought as she looked at Yabamiya. Please. Amy ran over from the blacksmith's shop. She looked at the deathly pale Cece, then at Crassus and Julian, and her little face was filled with concern and urgency. Little Amy, I don't know any healing magic. Crassus looked at Amy with an apologetic expression. Right now, I can only stop the bleeding from their wounds and go back to concoct healing potions for them. Julian looked at the 2 men on the ground, and waved at Sargeras and the others. Carry them to my shop. Novan looked at Amy with admiration. This was the first time he had seen this precious disciple whom Crassus had described as extremely talented. She was indeed very intelligent and full of love. Okay, Sargeras hurriedly replied as he picked up Lulu, who was as stiff as ice, and walked over. Cece, let me carry her. When Yabamiya saw the 2 lava demons walking toward Cece, he quickly stepped forward and bent down to carry Cece gently. He then followed Julian to the magic potion shop. Boss, I'll go and help. Sally looked at Yabamiya's receding figure, and clenched her fists as if she had made up her mind. She said goodbye to Meg, and followed him into the magic potion shop. Father, I want to go and see Big Sister Cece and the others. Amy turned to Meg with a concerned expression. Go ahead. You were very brave today, and you did very well, Meg praised as he stroked Amy's hair with a smile. A smile appeared on Amy's face as she jogged toward the magic potion shop, and Ugly Duckling hopped along behind her. Take those guys back first. We'll interrogate them after they've stabilized. The 6 lava demons did a good job, so there's no need to interrogate them. The 2 injured beings and the lava demons were all taken away by Urian. Branley listened to Barzil's brief account of what had happened, and as someone who often dealt with the affairs of the Grey Temple, he was naturally able to come up with a solution very quickly. Lulu and Cece definitely had something to do with this incident, but they were the ones who were forced to retaliate. Furthermore, they took the initiative to attack in order not to implicate others. Apart from the fact that they had to bear some responsibility for destroying the building, they weren't at fault. Now that they were severely injured, and Julian had personally said that he would protect them, the Grey Temple couldn't be too embarrassed. Thus, he had no choice but to let the matter rest for now. Sorry for the fright. If you don't mind, please come in. Meg looked at the customers outside the restaurant with a smile. He was also a little worried about the injuries of the druids, but after what had happened today, it was very important for him to appease the customers. Of course we're going to eat. Mr. Mack, give me a braised chicken and rice and a sweet tofu pudding. Crassus led the way into the restaurant. I'm just here to eat. Novan also smiled as he took a glance at Meg. This restaurant owner looks very young, but he's very brave. He didn't even bat an eyelid when the giant wolf was about to pounce on him. Meg also looked directly into Novan's eyes with a smile. To Meg Alex, Novan was a worthy opponent. As for Meg, he had transmigrated from the modern world, so he had a lot of respect for the principal, but not much respect for him, so his expression was very calm. Where have I seen this pair of eyes before? As they passed by each other, a series of names suddenly flashed through Novan's mind, but he dismissed them all in the end. Perhaps all interesting young people had similar eyes. Just like that young man who claimed that he could slice open his spatial domain with a single sword strike. What a pity. Meg looked in the direction of the magic potion shop, then turned and walked into the restaurant. It seemed that he had to take care of the restaurant himself for the time being. The only damage to the restaurant from the previous battle was the door, which had been pierced by an arrow at the beginning, and then sent flying by Lulu's slap. Some spilled food and spoons fell to the ground, which were all caused by the panicked customers. Overall, the damage was still acceptable. Hello, Principal. Principal Novin also came to eat at Mamie's. Looks like Mamie's is becoming more and more famous. All of the customers greeted Novin respectfully when they saw him. With Novin around, they felt much more at ease and returned to their seats. Holy fuck. I lost a piece of meat in my Ruggiemo. My heart hurts. How much is this spoon? We don't have to pay for the damage caused by an accident like this, right? Of course, if you can have another sweet tofu pudding, I'd be more than willing to pay for it. Chapter 298. All of a sudden, the restaurant was filled with grief. They had been enjoying the delicious food, but something so thrilling had suddenly happened. Although it was a close call in the end, it was still unforgettable that the food had been spilled. I can only provide one helping of tofu pudding, but I'll pay for the broken cutlery. If you want to talk about miserable, isn't your front door still in good condition? Meg stood in the middle of the restaurant, and pointed at the empty front door helplessly. What happened today was really unexpected. The customers all burst into laughter upon hearing that. That's right, Mr. Mac didn't do anything to offend anyone, and the restaurant's front door was smashed away. Furthermore, Boss Mag and little Amy had fearlessly stood at the entrance of the restaurant to protect the young woman in the white dress, and everyone was quite touched by their actions. Not everyone would stand up for a customer who had only been to the restaurant twice, let alone in a dangerous situation like this. Alright, since Mr. Mac has said so, I'll have another Ruggiemo to calm myself down. My braised chicken soup spilled. I'll have another braised chicken rice. My head can be broken, and my blood can flow. I can tell you two aren't true love. I hid under the table and didn't spill a single drop of tofu pudding. But I still have another helping of Yangzhou fried rice. The customers who had calmed down because of Novin's appearance relaxed again because of Meg's words. Anything could happen in Chaos City. After all, the battle between the two 10th-tier magic casters, Crassus and Julian, had attracted a lot of attention, so not many people would be so pretentious as to want to go home after a scare. Alright, please wait a moment. Meg took down the customers' orders one by one, and walked over to Novin and Crassus, who had just sat down at a table. He smiled, and asked, "What would you like to order? The restaurant is very unique. Seems like you've been to many places." Novin wasn't in a hurry to place his order. He looked around the restaurant before looking into Meg's eyes with a smile, as if he were trying to glean something from Meg's body. After spending a lot of money, it's natural that it would be more unique. That artist claimed that he had traveled around the continent and knew everything. However, it was obvious that he was bragging. In the eyes of an expert, he would be a laughing stock. Meg's expression was natural as he smiled. He was not flustered at all by this level of probing. "Host. Please watch your words. This system never brags." The system's angry voice rang out. Crassus shook his head. "Then you've wronged him. These places are pretty much the same. It's just that the drawing of the Mage Tower is a little ugly." Novin nodded, and commented, "Chaos City is indeed very well drawn, but it lacks some artistic conception. If everything is drawn, it would be no different from drawing nothing at all. This is ingenious work, but it can't be considered superb." "See, I didn't say that," Meg thought to himself, and he was struck by the urge to laugh. He designed this Magus Tower, so how can he blame me for drawing something that's ugly when he designed it himself? This is basically a one-to-one conversion of the real thing. This Chaos City drawing is a scaled version of a satellite map. Aside from the fact that there are no labels, you can just use it as a map. Do you have to talk about artistic conception with a map? The system's indignant voice sounded as if it wanted nothing more than to jump out in protest. Meg merely smiled and didn't say anything. For some reason, he was quite pleased to hear the system's exasperated voice. Novin withdrew his gaze from Meg. It appeared that he was overthinking things. He flipped open the menu, and was slightly surprised to see the prices on it. However, he didn't show it on his face. After looking at the menu for a while, he closed it and said, "I'll have a braised chicken and rice and a savory tofu pudding." "All right, please wait a moment." Meg nodded with a smile before walking toward the kitchen. He heaved an internal sigh of relief. As long as he could get past Novin, there would be no problems in Chaos City. Furthermore, if he wanted to invent something like a steam engine in the future, he would have to come into contact with him. Even though the vice principal of the Hater Institute was an expert in this field, he was still not qualified to make any demands. "This young man is quite interesting," Novin said with a smile as he looked at Meg's back. "He is indeed very interesting. I feel like he can change this world." Crassus also nodded with a smile. He paused momentarily before continuing, "When it comes to the definition of delicacies and cooking methods, he's a genius. Changing the world is not an easy task." Novin shook his head. "Novin, you used to boast like that in front of me many times." Crassus pursed his lips. "Because I boasted, I've been doing it my entire life. However, it looks like Chaos City won't be able to reach the state I want it to be before I'm lying in my coffin." Novin shook his head with a smile. He was a little proud, but also a little dejected. "What you've done has already changed the world. 100 years ago, no one would have believed that a city where all races could coexist peacefully would appear on the Norland continent. No one would have thought that all races would receive equal education from a young age. However, all of this has happened in Chaos City, in Chaos School." The smile on Crassus' face faded, and he nodded with a serious expression as he said, "You've already done more than enough to change the world. It's not the same as the two of us doing small things. I didn't really believe that he could change the world, but now, I feel like I can look forward to it. An elf and a demon eating at the same table must have a special charm to it. It's more efficient than what I've been cooking for the past few decades, so it's worth looking forward to." Novin's gaze fell on the elf and demon sitting across from each other at the table with a hint of surprise and anticipation on his face. "Master Turtle, are they going to recover?" Amy followed him into the magic potion shop, and looked at Cece and Lulu, who were lying side by side on the shelves, with a concerned look on her face. "Don't worry, they won't die. However, they won't be able to recover that quickly either." Julian walked toward the shelves filled with magic potions of different colors with his hands clasped behind his back, and said in a hoarse voice, "Those big guys, you can leave now. It's too hot." "All right." Sargeras hurriedly nodded, and led the lava demons out of the room. Lulu turned to look at Cece with difficulty. She slowly placed her fingers on the counter, and gently grasped Cece's hand as a doting smile appeared on her face. Cece's face was deathly pale, and she was on the verge of passing out. However, after Lulu grasped her hand, she seemed to have breathed a sigh of relief, and a smile also appeared on her face. "It's great that you're still here after surviving a disaster." Chapter 299. Let's give it a try. Julian replied without even turning his head. He held a long-necked crystal vial in his hand, and added all kinds of magic potions into it before gently shaking it. "Big Sister Aisha, you can do it." Amy looked at Sally with anticipation in her eyes. Then, she stood on her tiptoes and comforted Cece and Lulu, Big Sister Cece, Big Bear, don't worry. Big Sister Aisha and my Master Turtle Shell are both super powerful. They'll definitely make you two better. You have to get better. This kind of love is so touching. Yabamiya stood off to the side with an anxious expression on her face as she looked at the two of them with their fingers intertwined. Save her first. Lulu stuttered in a hoarse voice. She looked at Sally, who was standing beside the counter, with a hint of complex emotions in her eyes. All right. Sally nodded, and a chopstick appeared between her fingers. A flash of green light appeared, and the chopstick transformed into a small green bamboo at a speed that was discernible to the naked eye. Ha! Julian stopped what he was doing, and looked back at the green bamboo in Sally's hand with a hint of surprise. Dense life force energy was emanating from the small bamboo, and he looked up at Sally. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he thought to himself, I didn't think that she would be able to use life magic. Looks like she's quite an important figure in the elven race. Life magic of this level is indeed much more effective than magic potions. I underestimated her. However, will there be any adverse reactions between nature magic and life magic? Cece struggled to open her eyes, and she looked at the green bamboo in Sally's hand with a hint of surprise and nervousness in her eyes. The aura of life magic was very familiar to her, but it was also completely different from nature magic. It was as if a tree with the same root had suddenly split into two branches, and it had grown in two different environments, thereby taking on two completely different forms. Almighty Tree of Life, please grant me the power of life to cleanse all impurities. Sally murmured a spell in a low voice, and gently touched the wound on Cece's lower abdomen with her right hand that was holding the green bamboo. A pale green light slowly shrouded her lower abdomen. The layer of frost that had stopped the bleeding shattered and dissipated. The wound that almost ran across her lower abdomen was still stained with black and red filth. Fresh blood was about to flow out again. That was the venom on the werewolf's claws. It was also the reason why the wound could not stop bleeding. Ah! Cece's eyebrows furrowed, and she let out a cry of pain. Her body subconsciously wanted to curl up into a ball, and her forehead a cold sweat instantly. Lulu held Cece's hand, and his eyes were filled with tenderness and worry. Cece also looked into Lulu's eyes, and the pain seemed to have lessened by half. Sally's other hand gently brushed over the wound, and a stream of blue water appeared and washed over the wound. The blackish-red dirt was immediately washed away by the water, as if it had met its nemesis. The wound returned to its normal color, and the blood stopped flowing out under Sally's control. Phew! Cece let out a sigh of relief. The stabbing pain from the wound was immediately reduced. The water flowing over the wound was cool and comfortable, as if a pair of nimble little hands were gently caressing it. Ha! There seems to be something in her body that is automatically healing the wound. Although it's very slow, the effect is somewhat similar to life magic. Sally was just about to touch Cece's wound with her little bamboo, when she saw a touch of green light appear on the wound. She couldn't help but be surprised. She had seen this light when she was fighting before, and it was a magic wave that was very compatible with nature. Maybe it's a natural ability of self-healing. Sally didn't think too much about it. She touched the wound with her little bamboo, and the green light was continuously injected into the wound. The wound, which was so deep that her internal organs could almost be seen, began to heal automatically. This process lasted for about 3 minutes. The tender green bamboo turned into a withered one, and then turned into a pile of ash in Sally's hand, which drifted to the ground. The tender green light enveloped Cece's body. The wound had completely healed, and there was only a faint layer of scab on the surface. She had absorbed all the vitality brought by the life magic, and her pale face regained some color. It seemed that the wound was no longer a problem. Sally was also relieved. Cece's wound was different from the small one on Meg's hand. She rarely used life magic to save people, but from the looks of it, it seemed to be working well. As long as she absorbed the remaining life energy, her life wouldn't be in danger. Sally took out a second chopstick from somewhere, and prepared to save Lulu. At this moment, a withered sapling suddenly emerged from Cece's lower abdomen. The green leaf at the top of the sapling withered again, leaving only a hint of green on the tip. Then, the sapling started to absorb the life energy on the surface of Cece's body crazily. It finished absorbing all the life energy in the blink of an eye, and disappeared into Cece's lower abdomen again. What's this? Sally was a little stunned. The sapling had only appeared and disappeared for less than 3 seconds, but she had clearly seen how it absorbed the life energy. However, after the sapling disappeared into Cece's body again, her breathing seemed to have calmed down. Apart from feeling a little weak, she should be fine. Julian withdrew his gaze from Cece's lower abdomen and sighed in his heart. It really is the world tree, but it looks like it's about to wither. It seems like it's going to be difficult for the druids to regain their former glory. Sister Aisha is so powerful, Amy said softly with her eyes wide open. Please, I beg you to save him. Cece was still too weak to get up. She turned to Sally and begged. She held Lulu's big hand gently with her little hand, and her eyes were full of concern. All right. Sally nodded. Although she was a little confused by what had just happened, she still started to save Lulu immediately. Compared to Cece, Lulu's injuries were even more shocking. Almost no part of his body was intact. The blue water washed over his wounds, and a green light enveloped his entire body. The wounds stopped bleeding, and scabs began to form over them. The pained expression on his face slowly faded, and his breathing gradually calmed down. He glanced at Cece, and his head tilted to the side as he fainted. Sally let go of the bamboo that had already turned into ashes, and said to Cece, whose face was full of concern, "The wounds have stopped bleeding. They won't tear open if he doesn't move too much. However, his injuries are too serious, and he has lost too much blood. He needs to rest for a while, so he's asleep now." Thank you so much." Cece forced herself to sit up, and said gratefully to everyone. "I'm glad you're all fine." A happy smile appeared on Yabamiya's face. Suddenly, her eyes widened, and she turned to run out of the door as she yelled, "I have to go back to work. Boss must be very busy by himself. I have to go back to work too." Sally panicked. There were so many customers in the restaurant, and Meg couldn't handle everything by himself. Chapter 300. At the entrance of the magic potion shop, Yabamiya, who was wearing a black maid's outfit, plunged her head into Elizabeth's broad chest, who was wearing a blue dress. Elizabeth raised her hands reflexively, and Yabamiya's entire face was buried in her chest. Time seemed to have stopped in that instant, and silence ensued. Sorry." Yabamiya slowly raised her head from Elizabeth's chest, and apologized with a hint of embarrassment on her face. "Can you take your face away from me now?" A hint of embarrassment and frustration flashed through Elizabeth's cold face. If she hadn't seen who was pouncing on her, anyone who dared to touch her in such a manner would definitely have been reduced to a pile of ice by now. However, at the sight of this petite half-dragon girl, who had her face buried in her chest and was looking up at her with an embarrassed expression, Elizabeth abruptly halted the spell that she was about to unleash. For some reason, she was struck by a feeling that she was rather adorable. Sorry, I'm really sorry." Only then did Yabamiya return to her senses. She hurriedly took 2 steps back, and bowed to Elizabeth at a 45-degree angle. Even the tips of her ears were flushed as she thought to herself, "What should I do? How could I do something so impolite? Ah!" My God. But, it really is so big, so soft, so comfortable. Elizabeth looked at the frantic Yabamiya, and the hint of displeasure in her heart dissipated. Furthermore, she had been thinking about something else, so she hadn't noticed Yabamiya. Elizabeth's thoughts just so happened to have something to do with her. She knew that it was almost impossible for her to find her half-sister on the first day that she had received the news, but looking for someone in Chaos City was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Now that she had found a half-dragon girl of the right age, she naturally wasn't going to let her off the hook so easily. I'm fine, Elizabeth said in a cold voice as she appraised Yabamiya. Yabamiya was a little petite, and her limbs were thin and slender. The strange black and white dress that she was wearing accentuated her figure perfectly, but her chest was a little big. She had a pair of small golden dragon horns on her head, and a white hairband on her head. Her golden hair was tied into a side ponytail that hung down to the right. What caught Elizabeth's attention were Yabamiya's different colored eyes. Her left eye was golden, and her right eye black. A hint of surprise appeared in Elizabeth's dark blue eyes. She wasn't sure that Yabamiya had a pair of golden dragon bloodline, but it was undoubtedly a little more than a little. She's so beautiful. Yabamiya was also surreptitiously sizing up Elizabeth. Her skin was as fair as snow, and she was about 20 years old. She was extremely beautiful, and her long dress looked as if it had been carved out of ice. She was like a goddess who had descended from the heavens. She was just standing there casually, but her cold and arrogant aura made people want to lower their heads. In contrast to Sally's cold and noble aura, this girl's aura was pure and unadulterated. Yabamiya had rushed out of the door and bumped right into Yabamiya. Although Yabamiya had said that she was fine, she was still a little nervous. She lowered her eyes, and didn't know what to say. What's wrong, Mia? Sally's voice suddenly sounded. She saw Yabamiya walking out of the magic potion shop with her hands hanging by her sides as if she had done something wrong. Only then did she notice Elizabeth, and a hint of surprise flashed across her eyes. Is she a giant dragon? Sally began to speculate. Even though Yabamiya was in her human form, her aura was still a little different from that of a giant dragon. Furthermore, her innate arrogance further confirmed her suspicions. She wondered how Yabamiya had provoked this giant dragon maiden. Yabamiya felt a little more confident after hearing Sally's voice, and a little sheepishly said, I accidentally bumped into her. I told you, I'm fine. Elizabeth's brows furrowed slightly as she took a glance at Sally. A hint of surprise also appeared in her eyes as she thought to herself, this elf isn't simple. Judging from the magic waves emanating from her body, she's most likely just as powerful as I am. I wonder what her relationship is with her. Oh, it's the beautiful white dragon sister. Amy's elated voice sounded as she walked out of the door with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She looked up at Elizabeth. Amy, do you know her? Yabamiya was a little surprised. I met her a few days ago at the city gate with Father. She's so beautiful, so I remember her. Amy nodded before waving at Elizabeth and saying, Hello, big sister white dragon. Meow. Ugly Duckling, who was still in Amy's arms, was looking at Elizabeth with a hint of hostility in its eyes. It extended its little paws in an attempt to show off its claws. Elizabeth took a glance at Amy and nodded in greeting. She had seen that man riding a strange carriage with this little girl in the afternoon, and she didn't think that they would meet again at night. Furthermore, it appeared that they all knew each other. I'm really sorry. My name is Yabamiya, but I have to go to work now. Goodbye. Yabamiya looked at the customers walking in and out of the restaurant, and hurriedly apologized to Elizabeth before hurrying into the restaurant. Amy, let's go in as well. Sally took a glance at Elizabeth before walking into the restaurant with Amy's little hand in hers. Giant dragons were generally prone to anger, and they always acted according to their wishes, so she didn't want to leave Amy here alone. Big Sister White Dragon, my restaurant's food is super delicious. You have to come and try it. Amy allowed Sally to lead her away obediently, but she still didn't forget to turn to Elizabeth. Elizabeth's gaze lingered on the restaurant's signboard for a while before making her way into the restaurant. Meg made his way over to Novin with a smile, and placed a tray in front of him as he said, "Here's your braised chicken and rice and savory tofu pudding. Please enjoy." "Sure." Novin nodded as his attention was drawn to the two delicacies in front of him. Golden chicken cubes, the alluring aroma of chicken soup, and all types of side dishes were cooked in a pot, but they didn't appear to be messy in the slightest. The rich reddish-golden chicken soup enveloped the chicken cubes, and Novin couldn't help but swallow. "Even though you've lived in Chaos City for several decades, when it comes to food, I still have to bring you here to eat the best." Crassus picked up a piece of braised chicken with his chopsticks, and put it into his mouth. He chewed slowly with a joyful expression on his face. "Shall I try it?" Novin also picked up his chopsticks and picked up a piece of chicken. The reddish-golden chicken soup enveloped the chicken cubes perfectly, and he put it into his mouth. The delicious chicken soup melted in his mouth first, and the flavor and aroma were enhanced to the extreme by some unknown spices. He gently bit into the chicken cubes, and the meat was tender and refreshing. After chewing carefully, he swallowed, and the flavor lingered in his mouth. Chapter 301. Elizabeth walked to the entrance of the restaurant, and suddenly stopped in her tracks. She turned her head slightly to look behind her, and saw a black shadow disappear into the bushes. She hesitated momentarily before turning around to leave. A blue frost appeared beneath her feet, and she disappeared from the street in the blink of an eye. "She's gone." After a while, a man wearing black tights came out of the bushes. He looked around anxiously, stamped his feet, and disappeared into the darkness again, walking through it. "Fox is spying on me." Elizabeth looked at the figure disappearing into the darkness from a nearby tree branch, and her brows furrowed slightly as a contemplative look appeared on her face. "Looks like Father was right, those people aren't trustworthy. I'll have to make a trip to that place today." Elizabeth gently stroked the ring on her right thumb as she turned to look in the direction of Amy's. She had already disappeared, leaving behind a trail of frost on the tree branch. Second Young Master, Director DeVoe of the DeVoe Tavern and Director Goodnia of the Goodnia Watch Company have been kept under wraps. We've spent a lot of money to bribe them, but only managed to get some rough information. In a slightly dim room, Mars looked at Cyril, who was sitting behind a desk opposite him, with a respectful expression, just like when he was standing beside President Jeffrey in the Aden Chamber of Commerce. Even the humble smile on his face was identical. "Tell me what's going on." The two of them are directors of our Aden Chamber of Commerce, and they're important figures in Chaos City. Isn't it a little disrespectful to the Aden Chamber of Commerce for them to be taken away for no apparent reason? Cyril crossed his legs as he gently tapped an intricate red pipe on the table, and looked at Mars with furrowed brows. "According to the information that we've received, they may have been involved in a 4th-tier incident, and a 3th-tier incident at the same time." Mars wore a grave expression as he looked at Cyril, and solemnly suggested, "Second Young Master, a 4th-tier incident is considered confidential in the Grey Temple, so it's best if we don't get too involved." Level 4 incident. Cyril pursed his lips and leaned back on the leather chair behind him. He said indifferently, "So what if it's a level 4 incident? Didn't you say that the people from the Devo Tavern and the Goody Watch shop have already sent the money over? Take half of it to the Grey Temple and the City Lord's castle, and get them out of Bottai prison first. Otherwise, everyone will say that the Aden Chamber of Commerce is a pushover and can't even protect the directors. Then, spend money to settle the rest of the matter." If there's not enough money, let the two families think of other ways. This. Mars hesitated. All right, Miss Signer is still waiting for me tonight. Just convert the money into a deposit receipt from Buffett Bank and give it to me. Cyril put the pipe in his chest pocket, got up, and walked out while whistling. A fourth-level incident can't be solved with money. This pool is much deeper than we thought, second young master. Mars muttered to himself helplessly as he looked at the door. He stood in the dim room and fell into deep thought. Yabamiya and Sally returned to the restaurant, and quickly got back to work. The restaurant resumed its efficient operation. Aside from the fact that the door had disappeared, and a patch of lush trees in a corner of the square had disappeared, everything seemed to be the same as before. All of the customers' emotions were gradually soothed by the delicious food, and they were immersed in the enjoyment of the food, quickly forgetting about their shock and displeasure. Father, Big Sister Cece and Big Bear have already fallen asleep after Big Sister Aisha's treatment. Master Turtle Shell said that they'll be fine after a good night's sleep. Amy stood at the entrance of the kitchen with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and a smile appeared on her little face as she spoke to Meg. Yeah, you're all great. You've done a great job. Meg nodded with a smile as he looked at Amy and the others with approval in his eyes. Sally had saved the druid couple despite the risk of being exposed. Yabamiya was clearly not very powerful, but she still rushed to the forefront, and Amy had expressed her willingness to help them from the very beginning. The three of them were all very kind people, and that made him very happy. Meg wasn't opposed to helping others to the best of his ability. Elated smiles appeared on both Amy and Yabamiya's faces. Sally was also putting away the utensils with a smile on her face. She had never heard such praise before. I have to admit that this is the best food I've ever tasted. After finishing the second bowl of rice, Novin placed the last piece of shiitake mushroom in his mouth and chewed it carefully before putting down his chopsticks with a satisfied expression. Crassus also finished his braised chicken and rice at about the same time as Novin, and he asked, "Is it enough to change the world?" Novin nodded, and said, "If even a normal family can cook something as delicious as this, then it would definitely redefine the cooking style of the Norland continent." Crassus pursed his lips, and said, "If even a normal family can cook something as delicious as this, then it wouldn't even cost 800 copper coins per serving. So if you want to change the world, then this is probably not enough." Novin also smiled. That's not necessarily the case. Even if they can't cook something as delicious as this, I'm sure many people would still be willing to give it a try if they can make ordinary food more delicious. Crassus shook his head as he pointed at the bowl in front of him with a smile, and said, "This is a direction. Changing the world has never been something that a single person can do. Perhaps he can provide a direction that will convince everyone." Novin fell silent, and his eyes lit up as he looked at the bowl in front of him. He suddenly stood up and walked toward the door as he said, "I have something important to do. I'm very satisfied with tonight's dinner. Thank you for your hospitality. Hey, your savory tofu pudding is still." Crassus raised his hand to look at Novin, who had already disappeared out the door. He looked at the savory tofu pudding across from him, and shrugged nonchalantly as he scooped up a spoonful of sweet tofu pudding. He shook his head, and said, "Savory tofu pudding isn't that good anyway, so it's not a pity that I didn't eat it." All of the people sitting at the nearby tables immediately looked over at the untouched savory tofu pudding on the table. All of them wanted to say something, but refrained from doing so when they thought of Crassus' status. Chapter 302. Who told you that? Our little Amy only needs to cast a single fireball spell to take care of those puppies. Crassus looked at the fuming Amy, and he wanted to chuckle, but he still put on a serious expression. Really? Amy looked at Crassus in disbelief. Even though she hadn't done anything, those big puppies looked really powerful. Would a single fireball really be enough to take care of them all? Of course it's true, but not now. As long as little Amy learns magic from me, it won't take long. No matter how many puppies come tonight, a single fireball spell will be enough to take care of them. Crassus nodded with a serious expression. He then smiled and said, "Of course, if Amy wants to use her wand to knock those puppies on the head, it'll be no problem at all. All right, I'll study hard. If they come again, I'll knock their heads on the head." Amy nodded with a serious expression on her little face. Then, her gaze fell on the untouched tofu pudding in front of her, and her eyes immediately lit up. She looked at Crassus with elation and asked, "Master, did you order this for Amy?" "I haven't eaten it, but aren't you full already?" Crassus said with a peculiar expression. "I was full, but I'm so angry that I'm hungry, so I'll eat it. I didn't even have savory tofu pudding for dinner." Amy had already reached for the spoon, and was happily eating. Crassus shook his head with a resigned smile. However, he was also in a very good mood at the sight of her eating happily. He also picked up the spoon and continued to eat the sweet tofu pudding. "Little Amy, this is a magic shield that can be used 3 times. If you're in danger, use a small fireball to burn that little red bead, and the shield will automatically open to protect you." After dinner, Crassus took out an exquisite blue crystal bracelet and put it on Amy's wrist. In the middle of the bracelet was a red bead about the size of a pinky finger. There were some complicated runes engraved on the bead, and it looked very magical. The guests looked at the bracelet in Amy's hand and were a little envious. There was no need to doubt the effectiveness of a magic shield given by a great magician. Moreover, it was so small and convenient. It was really enviable to have such a master. So powerful. "Can I try it on now?" Amy's eyes lit up as she looked at the bracelet with an eager expression. "Not now. You can only use it when you're in danger. You only have 3 chances, so it would be a pity to waste them. I have to wait for the materials to arrive from Rodu before I can make a new one for you." Crassus hurriedly stopped him. The magic shield could be immune to all attacks below level 9 for 3 minutes and could be activated 3 times. The materials used and the manufacturing process were very complicated. "All right, thank you, Master Halfbeard." Amy nodded and retracted her hand. She looked at Crassus and thanked him. "You're welcome." Crassus waved his hand with a smile. He couldn't hide the smile on his face no matter how hard he tried. As expected, he was very happy to spoil his disciple. After Crassus finished his tofu pudding, he paid the bill and left. Sargeras returned to the restaurant with the Burning Legion. However, only Sargeras came in with a chair in his hand. The guest sitting at the table at the entrance of the restaurant just happened to be paying the bill, so Sargeras pulled out his folding chair and sat down at the table. "What would you like to order?" Yabamiya walked over to Sargeras with a smile on her face. She had a good impression of these ferocious-looking but kind-hearted demons after witnessing Sargeras slap the werewolf away with his chair and beat him up with his other lava demons. Yabamiya looked at the other demons standing outside the restaurant, and was a little confused. "There are still empty seats in the restaurant, why aren't they coming in?" "I'd like 30 Rugiamos," Sargeras said with a bashful smile. As soon as Sargeras said that, everyone in the restaurant turned to look at him. 30 Rugiamos. I've never seen anyone buy Rugiamos like that. 30 Rugiamos. Yabamiya was also a little surprised. Sargeras usually only ordered 11 Rugiamos. Yes. According to the tradition of the lava demons, we have to treat our most valiant warriors well after a battle. They all did well today. Sargeras nodded with a smile. He looked at the lava demons outside the restaurant with a satisfied expression. "All right, please wait a moment. But if they want to eat together, there are seats available in the restaurant now." Yabamiya didn't ask any more questions. It's all right. Let them eat outside so they don't scare the other customers. Sargeras shook his head with a bashful smile. Scaring the other customers was one of the reasons. In fact, Sargeras was more worried that they wouldn't be able to afford the compensation if they accidentally set the restaurant on fire. All right. Yabamiya didn't insist. After all, Rugiamos didn't have to be eaten in the restaurant. He turned and walked to the kitchen. In the kitchen, Meg listened to Yabamiya's order and said with a smile, 36 Rugiamos. One extra for each of them. Take it as a token of my appreciation. Meg had a very good impression of these lava demons, especially when they stood up for justice and shouted for Rugiamos tonight. He was a little touched. Moxa poked his head into the restaurant and looked expectantly at Keel. Keel, are the holy Rugiamos that our boss mentioned really that delicious? Not just delicious. You'll know in a moment. It's so delicious that you can't stop eating, Keel said with a mysterious smile, keeping Moxa in suspense. So mysterious. Looks like there really is something good to eat tonight. Cassis rubbed his big bald head with an expectant smile. Big bald head, second bald head, third bald head, fourth bald head. Amy sat down at the entrance of the restaurant with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She looked at the lava demons nodding their heads and giving them nicknames. Keel and the others all had strange expressions on their faces, but even their boss had accepted the nickname, Big Bald Head. What could they do? Here's your Rugiamos. Not long after, Yabamiya came out with a small mountain of Rugiamos. He smiled and said, the boss said that he would like to give each of you a free Rugiamo to thank you for your help. Thank you, Mr. Mac. Sargeras's eyes lit up, and he put 6 Rugiamos on the tray in front of him. Yabamiya walked out with the tray, and gave the rest of the Rugiamos to the lava demon standing at the entrance. Smells so good. Is this the legendary holy Rugiamos? Karzak looked at the Rugiamos in his hands, and his eyes completely lit up. They look good, but they're a little small. I can eat one in 2 bites. Cassis tore open a paper bag, and bit off half of a Rugiamo. The other demons also took a big bite out of their Rugiamos to replenish the energy they had lost in the previous battle. So delicious. And this feeling. It feels like something is going to come out of my body. The eyes of the demons who had eaten Rugiamos for the first time widened as soon as they took a bite. Roar! All of the demons let out low roars almost at the same time, and balls of fire rose from their bodies as if there were torches at the entrance of the restaurant. Chapter 303. The lava demons roared in unison, and flames rose nearly a meter into the air. They had successfully attracted the attention of the customers and passers-by in the restaurant. After all, such a spectacular scene wasn't often seen. How is this possible? I think I broke through my 2nd tier seal. I've been stuck at the 4th tier for over 20 years, but now I'm at the 5th tier. I can also clearly feel that the seal is loosening. Even though it hasn't been broken, there's a gap now, so it won't be long before it's broken. A 5th tier mouthful. I also broke through. Expressions of ecstasy appeared on the faces of Cassis, Marxa, and Karzak as they stared at the Rugiamos in their hands with incredulity. The seal that had troubled the lava tribe for centuries had been broken through by a single mouthful of Rugiamo. This miraculous effect left their mouths agape. If it hadn't happened to them, they would never have believed that such a thing could happen. Holy Rugiamo! It really is the hope of our lava demon's revival. Cassis took a bite of the remaining half of the Rugiamo. He could feel the blood rushing through his body, and lava flowing over his skin. It was an indescribable feeling. It was as if the blood in his body that had been dormant for many years had been ignited, and he could see the glory of the lava demons when they had once stood at the pinnacle of the Norland continent. It was the right decision to let them eat outside. Sargeras looked outside the restaurant with a smile on his face. His biggest goal was to let more of his people eat Rugiamos, and it was also the goal of the Burning Legion. Why do I feel like Mr. Mac has recruited a bunch of very powerful fighters? That's not important. They just helped Mr. Mac out, and Mr. Mac gave each of them a Rugiamo. If there's another opportunity like this, I'm definitely not going to miss it. If I can get a sweet tofu pudding as a reward, I'm willing to risk my life. The customers also began to discuss spiritedly among themselves as they looked at the lava demons outside the restaurant. Of course, most of them were interested in the reward. A smile also appeared on Mag's face as he looked at the lava demons outside the restaurant. He was more than happy to be able to bring more benefits to his customers while bringing them delicious food. Customers came and went. The late customers were very interested in the disappearance of the restaurant's door. Fortunately, there were many enthusiastic customers. I heard that a 10th tier golden dragon wanted another helping of tofu pudding tonight, but was rejected by Mr. Mac. He was so angry that he wanted to destroy the shop, but he was stopped by 2 great magic casters. The fight was so fierce that it was Principal Novin who had to step in to stop it. The wooden door was smashed away during the fight. Meg shook his head helplessly as he listened to the increasingly bizarre stories being spread among the guests. Business hours have ended, and the ingredients we prepared have been used up. Everyone, come early tomorrow. At the entrance of the restaurant, Meg turned away the requests of the late customers with a smile. The door was empty, and it looked a little strange. A customer looked at Mag with a serious expression and said, "All right, but Boss Mag, I heard that a 10th tier giant dragon has set its eyes on your restaurant. You have to be careful. If you really can't handle it, you can apply for protection from the Grey Temple. I still want to eat at your restaurant often." I'll be careful. Meg nodded helplessly. He really couldn't reject the goodwill of the customers. However, he didn't know who spread the news about the 10th tier golden dragon, and there shouldn't be such a powerful being eyeing the restaurant yet. "Boss, do you need me to get someone to fix the door?" "I'm not sure if any carpenters will come," Yabamiya said as he looked at the empty door. "Don't worry about that. I'll find a profiteer later. He'll help me fix it." Meg shook his head with a smile. He looked at Yabamiya and Sally and said, "Pack up and get ready to leave. You still have to work tomorrow morning, so go back and rest early. Host, please watch your words. The wooden door produced by the system is definitely of the highest quality. The price is fair, and the price is fair." The system's indignant voice sounded. "By the way, Aisha, how many tickets were issued today? And what's the turnover?" Meg ignored the system's voice, and looked at Sally again. "We sold 136 plates of Yangzhou fried rice, 650 rugiamos, 820 plates of tofu pudding, 416 plates of braised chicken and rice, and 512 plates of cooked rice. The total income is 799,000 copper coins, and we sold 1,022 tickets." Sally walked to the counter, took out a notebook, and reported a series of numbers. "Today, we sold 136 plates of Yangzhou fried rice, 650 rugiamos, 820 plates of tofu pudding, 416 plates of braised chicken and rice, and 512 plates of cooked rice." "Wow, that's a lot of money." Amy's eyes lit up, as if there were little stars twinkling in them. 799,000. How much money is that? Yabamiya looked up and thought carefully. In the past, 600 copper coins was her entire salary, but the restaurant's daily turnover was more than 1,000 times her previous monthly salary. If all of that was converted into copper coins, it would be enough to form a small mountain, right? Okay. Meg nodded with a smile. He was also pleasantly surprised. 799,000 copper coins of turnover, after deducting the cost of ingredients, should be close to 500,000 copper coins of profit. What did 500,000 copper coins a day mean? If they maintained this turnover, this small restaurant could make 180 million copper coins a year, and 200 million copper coins a year wouldn't be a dream. Earning 200 million a year from opening a restaurant. Since when did earning money become so easy? Mag was also a little dazed himself. When the restaurant had first opened for business, Mag had still been thinking about how he and his daughter could survive in this world with the help of the restaurant. Now, the restaurant was already on the right track. One dish after another was released, and the number of customers was constantly increasing. The turnover was also increasing again and again, and the rate of development had already far exceeded his expectations. Very good, keep it up. Let's set a small target, and earn 100 million copper coins first. I'll give you a raise next month. Meg looked at Sally and Yabamiya with a smile. The restaurant's turnover had increased so quickly because of Yabamiya and Sally's efficient and accurate work. They deserved a higher salary to enjoy the dividends of the restaurant's development. Boss, I think the salary is already very high. Mia is very satisfied. Yabamiya quickly waved her hand. I'm satisfied too. Sally also nodded. She could eat 2 servings of tofu pudding and 1 serving of Yangzhou fried rice every day, and this kind of life made her very satisfied. You deserve better. Meg smiled, but he wasn't in a hurry to persuade them. Chapter 304. They're very weak now because they lost too much blood. The magic potion can help them recover to a certain extent, but if they want to recover, they'll need more nutrition and rest. Sally nodded. She was the one who had treated them earlier, so she was more familiar with their condition. Okay, you guys go ahead and take a look. I'll make some chicken soup for them. They probably won't be able to eat anything right now. We'll have supper later to celebrate today's profit. Meg nodded. Today's profit had put him in a good mood. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before he could purchase the next strength point, and the level of the restaurant could be upgraded as well. The system had been messing around for a long time. In fact, he wanted to know what changes would happen to the restaurant after it was upgraded to LV2, and what new privileges would be granted. Of course, Meg was more concerned about the restaurant's defense. What happened tonight gave him a sense of urgency. After all, this was a different world, and there were countless powerful and dangerous beings. Now, even a level 4 werewolf could easily break through the restaurant's defense and pose a threat to him and his daughter. This kind of hidden danger made him feel a little uncomfortable. If the system could upgrade the restaurant's defense system along with the restaurant's level, it would definitely become the safest fortress in the world. Imagine if the restaurant's defense system was upgraded to the maximum level of 10. Even if the same thing happened again, he would only need to carry a small stool and sit in the restaurant with Amy to watch the show. Meg was looking forward to this kind of scene. Father, can we really eat before going to bed tonight? Amy's eyes lit up. Her father never allowed her to eat before going to bed. Yes, you're allowed to eat today. Meg nodded with a smile. He then looked at Sally and Yabamiya and said, You guys eat before you go. Really? Yabamiya's eyes lit up. Sally's face also had a look of anticipation. Of course. If you're worried about them, you can go ahead and see if they can eat. I'll make supper for you. Meg nodded and turned to go to the kitchen. We'll be going then, Amy said and went out with Sally and the others. System, install the door for me, Meg said inwardly as he turned to look at the empty street outside the restaurant. The system refuses to provide services to customers who slander the system's credibility. The system's slightly arrogant voice sounded. If that's the case, then I'll have to take a day off tomorrow to fix the door. Originally, I thought that with the current turnover, I would be able to upgrade the restaurant in 10 days to half a month. But now, it seems that this kind of thing can't be rushed. Let's plan slowly, Meg said with a calm face. He opened the fridge and took out a turkey drumstick. Then, he began to cut the chicken into pieces. After a moment of silence, the system's voice sounded. After the system's reevaluation, the host's credibility score is relatively high. Even though you have insulted the system, considering that this is your first offense, the system will be lenient this time. The installation fee this time will be waived. What can you do with 10 copper coins? You're someone who wants to make a lot of money. If you stick to 10 copper coins, you won't be able to achieve great things. Without waiting for the system to finish its words, Meg calmly picked up a handful of shiitake mushrooms and soaked them in water. Then, he began to stir-fry the chicken. Host, the system warns, please do not interrupt the system when it is speaking. I also have my own dignity. I also have my own dignity. I also have my own dignity. The system's angry voice sounded. Then let me ask you. Between 10 copper coins and dignity, which is more important? Meg put down the kitchen knife in his hand and asked seriously. The system fell into a long silence. Ding. 10 copper coins installation fee has been successfully deducted. Ding. Wooden door has been successfully customized. Ding. 20 gold coins installation fee has been successfully deducted. Wooden door is being installed. The system's cheerful voice sounded. In the blink of an eye, the restaurant's door was reinstalled. You win. Meg looked at the restaurant's door, which had been successfully installed. He opened his mouth to say something, but in the end, he swallowed it back down. The system's moral integrity really had no limits. For supper, of course, the mild-natured braised chicken and rice and Yangzhou fried rice were the best match. After all, eating a rujiamo would make it difficult to sleep at night. It was too troublesome to make tofu pudding on the spot, and the amount of tofu pudding he consumed every day had to be controlled. Meg cooked 2 portions of braised chicken in 2 separate pots. He didn't put any side dishes aside from the chicken and shiitake mushrooms in the pot he had prepared for the druids. He put a little more soup in the pot as it was mainly for them to drink. Chicken soup was very nutritious, especially the combat chicken with shiitake mushrooms. It should be very beneficial for their recovery. The other pot was made strictly according to the standard of braised chicken. They had eaten dinner early. After 4 hours of intense work, Meg was actually a little hungry. Sally and Yabamiya, who had been working non-stop in the restaurant, were probably feeling the same. This was also the reason why Meg decided to make supper for everyone. For supper, I want spicy crayfish, roasted lamb skewers, roasted kidney, and 2 or 3 bottles of cold beer. That'll make it more flavorful. System, give me a recipe for roasted skewers. In the past, I've complained about at least 99 skewer restaurants, if not 100, right? Meg said in his mind as he put the lid on the big pot. This kind of Buddhist way of eating wasn't the right way to make supper. The recipe will be unlocked one by one. Please be firm in your heart as the god of cooking. For the god of cooking, there is no dish that cannot be made, the system said excitedly. Stop spouting nonsense. Meg curled his lips. He had completely understood the system's Taiji style of answering, but there was nothing he could do about it. Ha! Father, did you get that profiteer to replace the door so quickly? Amy pushed the door open and walked in with a look of wonder on her little face. Yeah, we didn't even see anyone come to install it. Yabamiya also had a look of curiosity on her face. She reached out and touched the wooden door. It was almost exactly the same as the previous one. It was made of the same wood material. Yes, that guy is shameless, but he's quite efficient. He brought the door himself and installed it in 5 minutes. Meg replied with a smile. He poured the chicken soup into a big pot and then asked, "How are the two of them? Can they drink the chicken soup?" "They're still very weak. It might be a little difficult for them to eat, but they can drink the chicken soup," Sally replied. When they went to check on them just now, Lulu and Cece had already woken up. They were probably still in pain from their injuries, so they hadn't fallen asleep yet. "Then let's bring the chicken soup to them first." Meg took 2 small bowls and 2 spoons, along with the big pot of chicken soup, and placed them on a tray. Then, he carried them to the door. "Mr. Mac, you're the best." Cece was very touched. However, her eyes were completely attracted by the chicken soup in Yabamiya's hand. She suddenly turned to Lulu and said earnestly, "But can you feed Lulu some chicken soup first? He lost a lot of blood. He must be very thirsty now." "No. I'll give it to you first. I'm not thirsty. I'm not thirsty at all when I look at you." Lulu shook his head gently. He looked at Cece with a gentle gaze. "All right, don't stand on ceremony. Let's drink it together." Meg rolled his eyes. They were just here to deliver chicken soup, but they were being fed dog food. Was there any justice in this world? This chicken soup was lighter than the braised chicken soup. Yabamiya scooped up a spoonful and blew on it before feeding it to Cece. Cece's eyes immediately lit up. What a delicious chicken soup. Even though it's not as thick as the braised chicken soup, the flavor hasn't been diluted in the slightest. Without the taste of the side dishes, the flavor of the chicken soup is even purer, and goes straight to the heart. The delicious chicken soup flowed down her throat and turned into a warm current that flowed to her lower abdomen. The feeling of weakness instantly disappeared. She could clearly feel the world tree, which had withered again to protect her life, starting to absorb this special energy. It was like a sweet dew after a long drought. Even she was infected by its joy. The wound that had been a little swollen and painful became warm, with a slight numbness. The feeling of pain was quickly disappearing. "I'm using chicken soup to irrigate the world tree. Will it become strange when it grows up?" Cece had a strange expression on her face when she sensed the world tree in her body absorbing the energy in the chicken soup excitedly. On the other side, Meg was also feeding Lulu the chicken soup with a spoon. Compared to Cece, who had a world tree in her body, Lulu's injuries were more serious. She obviously wouldn't be able to recover as quickly. However, the moment the chicken soup entered his mouth, his throat, which felt like it was on fire due to the excessive blood loss, was immediately moistened. A warm feeling spread throughout his body, and the pain was greatly reduced. His furrowed brows also gradually relaxed. It was even more effective than the potion that Julian gave him to stop the pain. The 2 bowls of chicken soup were quickly finished. Meg stood up and was about to get another bowl for them. "Mr. Mac, can I have some meat?" Cece looked at Meg with a pitiful expression. She looked at the big bowl on the table with desire in her eyes. "Are you sure you can eat meat?" Meg looked at Cece in surprise. She was struggling to even move just now, but now she wanted to eat meat. "Of course I can eat meat." Cece's eyes lit up immediately. She seemed to be in a better mood all of a sudden. She nodded with certainty. "All right then." Meg looked at Cece, who was in a much better state after drinking the chicken soup. He scooped a few pieces of chicken into her bowl and passed them to Yabamiya. Then, he scooped a bowl of chicken soup for Lulu. "I'm full. I won't drink anymore. Give the rest to her." "Thank you." Lulu looked at Meg, shook her head gratefully, and said firmly, "Okay." Meg looked at Lulu, who had no intention of negotiating, and took back the bowl in his hand. Meg admired this wife-spoiling maniac. After all, there were plenty of men in this world who could say nice things. A man who could choose between life and death to save his wife deserved respect. "Help me up. I can still have 3 more bowls." After drinking the second bowl of chicken soup, Cece had already recovered some of her mobility. She swallowed the chicken in her mouth, and spoke with an excited expression on her face. The World Tree was constantly healing her body, and at the same time, replenishing her energy at an extremely high rate. Chapter 306. The dark and eerie Bowtie prison was like a giant beast that was lying dormant underground. It had a strangely shaped horn in the darkness, guarding the southwest corner of Chaos City, and intimidating the chaotic night in Chaos City. Master Brandley, the Gabriel Black Cross serial murders have been cleared up. The first case was the murder of a Knight's deputy examiner 3 years ago. A family of 4 was brutally murdered. 2 years ago, a body was found in the sewers south of the city, with a cross carved into its arm. After 2 years of silence, 3 consecutive murders took place in Chaos City 3 months ago, including the deaths of 2 children under the age of 10. A black cross was left behind at the scene of each of the murders. After careful comparison, we found that the black cross found on Gabriel's body was made of the same material and specifications as the black crosses left behind at the scene of the crime. Furthermore, we found more black crosses in Gabriel's residence, as well as the severed limb of one of the victims. We can conclude that he's the murderer of the serial murders. Within a dimly lit room, a man in a set of black robes with a black cloth over his face was reporting to Brandley with his head bowed in a respectful manner. "Do DeVoe and Gourmet have anything to do with this? Why did they attack Mamie's? What are they trying to achieve?" Brandley asked. "The 2 of them most likely don't know anything about the serial murders, so they can be exonerated from this case. However, the owner of the DeVoe Tavern, DeVoe, has a lot of underlings. 2 years ago, he ordered Gabriel to beat up the owner of a winery for a sum of money, resulting in the latter being permanently disabled. After that, DeVoe took over his winery. There are quite a few cases of him hiring thugs to rob others of their belongings, and one of them died from severe injuries. Gourmet's situation is slightly better. He had a conflict with Mamie's over a bowl of tofu pudding, and he felt humiliated in the restaurant, so he asked DeVoe to come with him. Who would have thought that something like this would happen?" The man hurriedly replied. "If the DeVoe Tavern's actions are so atrocious, then why didn't our Grey Temple do anything about it? Severe injuries and deaths are no small matter." Brandley's brows furrowed. "About that." The man began to speak, but hesitated. "Speak." Brandley's gaze sharpened. "Prior to our investigation, the DeVoe Tavern had already been reported to the Grey Temple many times, but due to some unknown reason, it was suppressed. The earliest report could be traced back to 3 years ago," the man said in a low voice. "Is there a mole?" Brandley asked. "Sir, this is not something we can investigate with our authority." The man shook his head slightly and did not continue. "All right, I will report this matter." Brandley nodded in response, and didn't ask any further questions. The Grey Temple had a clear hierarchy of authority, and no one was allowed to investigate cases without the corresponding level of authority. This rule effectively restricted the authority of all levels of the Grey Temple, but it also made investigating cases a lot more complicated. Furthermore, someone has tried to bail DeVoe and Gourmet out during this period of time, and there are people who are not in charge of this case who are trying to find out more information. It's very likely that the confidential information of this 4th-tier case has already been leaked, the man said after a brief silence. "Who's trying to bail them out?" Brandley's frown deepened. The Aden Chamber of Commerce, the man replied in a quiet voice. Looks like they're getting more and more involved. They've most likely forgotten who they are. Branley slowly clenched his fists as he strode toward the door, and said, "Tell Deputy Warden Jonathan that Lord Roland has been keeping an eye on Bowtie this entire time." "Yes." The man lowered his head deeply to express his deepest respect. In a dark hall that was over 10 meters tall, specks of light were embellished in the upper part of the hall, making it appear as if there were a series of stars. At the very center of the hall was a round platform that was over 2 meters tall, and an elf in a dark blue magician robe was gently waving her wand. Specks of blue light drifted out of the tip of the wand before landing on the stars, making them appear even more dazzling. This was an elf of indeterminate age, and her facial features were quite ordinary, but she gave off an extremely regal air. Her face was expressionless as she looked up at the countless stars in the sky, as if she were looking at the seeds that she had sown. At the very center of the hall was the largest and brightest star, and not a single star dared to approach it, let alone compete with it in terms of brilliance. In the distance, there was a slightly larger star that seemed to be slowly rising. It wasn't as bright as the largest star, but it was still far more dazzling than all of the stars around it. "Mistress Helena, that bitch Irina dares to threaten the future of the elven race that you've chosen. She deserves to die. She's a degenerate who has been abandoned by the gods, an elf whose body has been sullied by a human, and a bitch who has given birth to a bastard. How dare she be so arrogant? How dare she?" Below the platform, an old woman with a crooked body and a hooked nose yelled in a shrill voice, and she looked as if she were about to spring to her feet with rage. "Shut up, the princess is not someone you can insult." The elf on the platform spoke in an indifferent voice, and a black leather whip appeared out of thin air before lashing heavily into the old woman's face, causing a crisp crack to sound throughout the entire hall. The hunchbacked elderly woman was sent flying, and only stopped after crashing into a stone pillar. She stood up with the help of the stone pillar in a trembling manner, and half of her face was completely swollen. She looked up at Helena with horror and bewilderment, and asked in a trembling voice, "Mistress Helena, did I say something wrong? If our brethren were to learn of what she did, how would she be able to continue living in this world, continue to occupy the tree of life, and continue to be regarded as the elven princess?" "You're right. Irina has indeed done something that brings shame to our elven race. She has been sullied by a human and abandoned by the gods." Helena turned to Heidi, and the black whip instantly coiled around her neck before lifting her up into the air until she was at eye level with her. She shook her head, and said, "However, if news of this were to spread, the reputation of our elven race would be tarnished, and we would be the laughingstock of the entire Norland continent. As such, only a few people can know about this, and not even one more will know about it. Now that you've learned of this, you'd better keep it to yourself. Otherwise, I think a dead person is more reliable." Heidi looked at Helena with horror and awe in her eyes. The whip around her neck made her feel the aura of death. Furthermore, this was all brought to her by Mistress Helena, whom she had served for hundreds of years. She hurriedly nodded vigorously before her neck was snapped. "Remember, Irina is the only princess of our elven race until a new princess appears. You have to know who you are." Helena raised a finger, and the whip around Heidi's neck was withdrawn before falling to the ground with a thump. "Yes. Yes." Heidi sprawled onto the ground with her face pressed tightly against the ground. Chapter 307. Hearing Amy's question, White Cat and Black Bear, the first thing that popped into Meg's mind was, Raleigh. Raleigh was the most carefree animal in the world, as it was able to survive by acting cute every day. However, Lulu and Cece were still druids in essence. They had just transformed into a bear and a white cat. As for whether their babies would turn into pandas, Meg wasn't sure. But from the looks of it, the prerequisites were already met. As for whether their genes were strong enough to give birth to a giant panda, that was something worth looking forward to. Cece was also stunned. She looked at Lulu with a blissful smile. Lulu said she wants to give birth to many babies with me, so we can have bears and cats in the future. That way, we won't have to worry about it anymore. Then, can I play with the babies after you give birth? Amy looked at Cece expectantly. Of course you can play with little Amy. You're a big sister from now on. Cece nodded with a smile. She was also looking forward to it. Cece quickly finished her third bowl of chicken soup, as well as half a bowl of chicken. A faint green glow appeared on her lower abdomen, and her face returned to normal. Mr. Mac, little Amy, Aisha, and Miss Yabamiya, thank you so much for saving me and Lulu, Cece said gratefully as she got off the counter and bowed to Meg and the others. It's nothing, you're welcome. Meg shook his head with a smile. Don't be afraid, big sister Cece. If any bad guys come, Amy will chase them away, Amy said, clenching her little fists. Yeah, I think you guys are the good guys, and those werewolves are the bad guys. It's only right that we help you. Yabamiya nodded. Sally nodded slightly and didn't say anything. She looked at Cece's lower abdomen with surprise in her eyes. When she was treating Cece earlier, she discovered that there seemed to be something in Cece's body that could absorb life magic. The feeling was similar to life magic but completely different at the same time. She found it very mysterious and even thought that she was hallucinating. But now, in this green light, she felt the same aura. This strange magical energy must have played a crucial role in the recovery of such a serious injury and being able to get out of bed so quickly. Although the braised chicken soup was delicious and nourishing, it was still far from being a panacea. Lulu, let me feed you some chicken soup. You have to drink more to get better. Cece walked slowly to the table, scooped a bowl of chicken soup and walked to Lulu. You drink. I'll just watch you drink. Lulu looked at Cece, whose complexion had improved a lot, and his heart was completely at ease. He shook his head with a doting look in his eyes. No, if you don't drink, I won't drink either. Cece pouted and shook her head. She scooped up a spoonful of chicken soup and blew on it before slowly feeding it to Tang Wulin. She said with a smile, you drink the chicken soup, and I'll eat the chicken. That way, we can finish this big bowl of chicken soup. Let's go and have some supper. Otherwise, we'll all be stuffed. Meg picked up Amy and walked out the door. It wasn't good to eat too much sweet food in the middle of the night. Yabamiya and Sally also followed them out the door silently. They had just survived a disaster, so they should give them some space. Lulu looked at Cece, and slowly raised her hand to touch her face as she said with a hint of self-reproach, Cece, I'm useless. I didn't protect you well. Says who? Lulu is my big hero. There's no one in this world more powerful than Lulu, and no one cares about me more than Lulu. Cece shook her head, and he was the only person in her golden eyes. I hope you dote on me like a child, and I worship you like a hero. After treating Julian to supper, Sally used magic to clean up the restaurant before going home with Yabamiya. Their busy day had finally come to an end. Meg locked the door and lowered the blinds. He looked at Amy, who was urging Ugly Duckling to run around the restaurant, and a gentle smile appeared on his face. He wasn't in a hurry to go upstairs. Instead, he pulled out a chair and sat down to watch. Meow, Ugly Duckling turned to Mag with a pleading expression. It had only had a few bites of the braised chicken, yet it was being forced to run 10 laps around the restaurant. This was physical punishment. Meg chose to ignore it. He looked at Amy, who was waving a small leather whip as she followed behind Ugly Duckling with a smile. Of course, it was more important for the little girl to have fun. After running 10 laps, Amy picked up the exhausted ugly duckling, who was lying on the ground. She gently rubbed its little head, and said, "Ugly duckling is such a good girl. You've run 10 laps. Do your best tomorrow." Ugly duckling rolled its eyes upon hearing that, and fainted in Amy's arms. "Let's go. It's time to go upstairs and sleep. We still have to go to Teacher Urian's for class tomorrow. The class starts at 7:30 a.m., so we can sleep a little longer." Meg switched off the lights and carried the two little ones upstairs. After washing up, Amy lay down on the bed, and turned to look at Meg. "Father, Grandpa Principal is so awesome. Can I become a powerful magic caster like him in the future?" "Of course. As long as Amy learns magic from Crassus and Master Julian, you'll become even more powerful than Principal Novin in the future." Meg nodded with a smile. She had inherited the bloodlines of a 10th tier knight and a 10th tier elf magic caster, and was learning magic from two 10th tier great magic casters. Meg felt that Amy's future was limitless. A super great magic caster. Amy closed her eyes happily, and soon fell asleep. "Little one, let me protect you before you become a super great magic caster." Meg walked to the bedside, and leaned over to kiss the hair in front of her forehead. He tucked her in, and turned to the door, saying in his heart, "System, I want to buy a sword." The system can provide thousands of choices. Long swords, short swords, heavy swords, soft swords. As long as it's what the customer needs, I have it all here. The system's voice sounded in the standard salesman's tone. "The one last time was enough, but I have a condition," Meg calmly interrupted. "Please speak, host. As my strength increases, I'll have to keep changing swords." "You'll have to take back those obsolete swords," Meg said seriously. Chapter 308. The recovery is only half of the original price. "Trust me, with my advancement speed, you'll definitely make a profit." Meg smiled and said indifferently, "You should know that there's a weapon shop right next to me. For 1,000 gold coins, I can also customize a good standard longsword. When the time comes, it won't be difficult to sell it for 500 gold coins." The so-called buyer's market referred to a market trend where supply exceeded demand, and buyers were in an advantageous position in the transaction. When dealing with the system, Meg habitually placed the transaction in a buyer's market. This way, he could take the initiative in the transaction. From experience, this was a very efficient way to bargain. Deal. Ding. 1,000 gold coins have been successfully deducted. The long sword has been prepared and can be delivered at any time. The system's somewhat unwilling voice sounded. "Let's do it now. Leave the sword at the balcony door." Meg's lips curled up slightly. He took out a set of loose but not cumbersome clothes from the wardrobe and changed into them before walking to the balcony. When he opened the balcony door, a long sword was already placed at the door. It was the same longsword he used to complete the mission in Stranglethorn Vale. After nearly being killed by the system's longsword that fell from the sky, Meg no longer had any confidence in the system's logistics. When it came to acting cool, it was better to be cautious. If the system didn't cooperate, it would be easy to fail. Meg reached out and picked up the longsword. The hilt was slightly cold to the touch. It weighed about 2.5 kilograms, and although it was a bit heavy, it didn't seem cumbersome at all. He twirled the sword in his hand, and the edge of the sword glinted coldly under the cold moonlight, unparalleled in sharpness. Gently closing the balcony door, Meg took a deep breath. His state of mind became incomparably calm, and his expression also became serious and solemn. If one were to say that the repeated cooking during this period had brought about many changes to Meg, the most obvious one would be his state of mind. How to focus on one thing, how to enter a state of mind in a short period of time. After experiencing death, he began to understand what was important to him. In the quiet night, he held the black long sword in his hand, as if it had become one with the darkness. Then, he abruptly thrust it forward. It was a very simple strike, without the slightest extravagance, as if it was just a casual stab. But this sword was very straight, perfectly straight. The tip of the sword, the body of the sword, the hilt, the wrist, the forearm. They were all in a straight line, as if they had been measured with the most precise ruler, without the slightest deviation. It was so straightforward that there was no way to avoid it. Meg sheathed his sword and stabbed out again expressionlessly. It was still a straight strike. The angle, speed, and even the height of his hand did not change at all. On the balcony of the third floor, Meg stood in place under the moonlight. He raised his hand and silently stabbed again and again. Every strike seemed to be the same, but also different. The monotonous and boring sword strikes seemed effortless, but it did not take long for Meg's forehead to be covered in fine beads of sweat. The clothes on his back were drenched in sweat, but every strike was still straight, and the angle and speed of his strikes were impeccable. 98, 99, 100. After unleashing the final sword strike, Meg slowly withdrew his slightly numb hand and heaved a long sigh. A numb sensation traveled from his fingers all the way up to his entire right shoulder, but his eyes were particularly bright as he looked at the long sword in his hand, as if he were reminiscing about something. 13 forms of dark shadow, a simple killing technique. The first form, straight stab. When practiced to the extreme, one can counter all changes by remaining unchanged. This is the real sword. Meg whispered to himself. This was the swordsmanship that Meg Alex had persisted in practicing for more than 10 years. The first 5 moves were the simplest swordsmanship moves: stab, point, swipe, collapse, and slash. Meg Alex had practiced each move tens of thousands of times, and the movements had long been deeply imprinted in his body. Meg's body had partially recovered, and now what he needed to do was to redevelop his body and stimulate the limits of what he could do at this stage, and completely control the abilities of his body. The advancement of strength was a gradual process, and Meg wanted to become stronger, but it was somewhat different from ordinary people who worked hard to practice. The system gave him a body that had once reached the peak of human beings, and then slowly activated the potential of this body with his physical strength points. Moreover, in his memory, there were powerful swordsmanship and combat skills. All this gave Meg a very high starting point and unlimited potential, but he was still Meg, not Alex. It was like the system had prepared the best kitchen and ingredients for him, and threw the best recipe and experience bag into his mind. However, in order to make the most perfect dish, he also needed to practice countless times in the test field for the god of cookery, and transform the experience of others into something that he was proficient in, and use the best ingredients to make the most perfect dish. Now, Meg faced the same problem in order to improve his strength. He had the best body, and in his mind, there were the most suitable techniques and experiences for him. The only thing he lacked was how to completely turn these things into his own. Of course, the current Meg was very good at doing this. Meg felt that things that could be done with continuous effort were not a problem. In the test field for the god of cookery, he practiced day and night without sleep, and he did not retreat at all. In the future, he would take 1 or 2 hours out every night to practice swordsmanship on his schedule. After twisting his wrist, Meg switched the long sword in his hand to his other hand, and continued to stab forward with the sword in his left hand. His movements were just as accurate and fast, or even faster. On the Norland continent, everyone knew that Meg Alex's right-hand sword was very fast, but many people also knew that his left-hand sword was even faster. On that night 3 years ago, when he was ambushed by 6 10th-tier powerhouses, Alex had killed 3 of them, and he had used his left-hand sword. It's a pity that I can't use origin power before I reach the 5th tier. That's a pity, Meg thought to himself as he practiced his swordsmanship seriously. He flipped through the incredible sword techniques in his mind, and his heart itched a little. The so-called origin power was somewhat similar to the internal power in wuxia novels. The innately weak humans were able to have the last laugh during the war among species, and share the continent with the 8 major species equally. The most important thing was that humans had awakened the cultivation method of origin power 1,000 years ago, and that gave them the ability to fight against giant dragons and demons head-on. The cultivation of origin power increased the upper limit of the human body. Whether it was strength or speed, it could be improved with the increase of origin power. And after reaching the 5th tier, coupled with the corresponding battle techniques, one could even release origin power, and increase one's combat power in a straight line. A 50-meter-long saber aura might be a little exaggerated, but a 3 to 5 meter-long sword aura was not an exaggeration. Back then, Meg Alex was at the peak of the 10th tier, and his sword aura was 12 meters long, and he shocked the world by slaying a dragon with one sword. Just the thought of splitting a fireball with one sword made one feel inexplicably high. Chapter 309. Of course, Meg didn't even have any essential power in his body right now, let alone sword intent. However, as his strength increased, his essential power should be able to slowly recover. With the support of essential power, humans could do many things that they couldn't do before. That purple-striped griffin was one of the main reasons why Alex was able to slay dragons back then. The true key to his strength was the enhancement of his essential power. Essential power combined with powerful sword techniques had terrifying power that could easily slice through the tough scales of giant dragons and pose a lethal threat to them. That purple-striped griffin and that sword-wielding man made even giant dragons feel threatened and fearful. There was even a period of time when not a single giant dragon could be seen in the sky above Rodu. So-called battle techniques were actually methods of using essential power in battle. They could barely be regarded as secret martial arts manuals. Only battle techniques could unleash the full potential of essential power and significantly enhance one's strength. The last 5 forms of the 13 shadow forms were actually sword techniques that could only be used after reaching the 5th tier. Meg shook his head to rid himself of the messy thoughts in his mind and continued to focus on his swordsmanship. He hadn't even become a 1st-tier knight yet, so it was still too far away for him to think about sword techniques. The most important thing for him to do now was to practice his swordsmanship and reach the pinnacle of his peers in order to build a good foundation for future improvement. This practice lasted for an hour. Meg wiped the sweat from his forehead and rotated his sore wrists. He placed his long sword under a partition in a small room before going downstairs to wash up. Meg lay in the bathtub filled with hot water and closed his eyes comfortably. After an hour, he had practiced 200 straight thrusts with both hands, allowing him to gain a better understanding and control of his own body. After extreme fatigue, he was also more aware of his body's resilience and powerful plasticity. Of course, an hour definitely wasn't enough. Meg had already formulated a progressive training plan for himself in his mind. He would gradually increase the time and intensity of his training, and he would start practicing every night after Amy fell asleep. This little one's cultivation speed is so fast. I've picked up a new one, so I can't possibly be slower than her. That would be a little embarrassing, Meg murmured to himself as he clenched his fists slowly. There was an unprecedented motivation in his heart. That night, Meg slept very soundly. However, he wasn't awakened by the alarm clock the next morning. Instead, he was awakened by a muffled sound and a slight tremor in his bed. Meg opened his eyes in a daze. He looked at the swaying painting hanging at the head of his bed and immediately sobered up. He threw his blanket aside and jumped up before flying directly toward Amy's little bed. This was an fucking earthquake. Beep, beep, beep. Warning, the cafeteria is under attack. Energy level 3 did not break through the restaurant's defense. At this moment, the system's voice suddenly sounded. Level 3 energy level. Meg immediately stopped in his tracks. The tremor had already stopped. Aside from the tilted alarm clock on the table and the slightly crooked painting at the head of his bed, there didn't seem to be any additional damage. However, when the restaurant had been attacked by a level 3 energy level attack, it hadn't been affected at all. He couldn't help but ask, "System, did someone come to cause trouble again?" The identity of the intruder is unknown. The method of attack is unknown, the system replied calmly. Meg took a look at the alarm clock on the table. It was only 5:00. He then looked at Amy, who was sleeping soundly on her little bed with Ugly Duckling in her arms. He put on some clothes and quietly went downstairs. Although a level 3 energy level attack couldn't break through the restaurant's defenses, Meg still decided to go and check on the situation. Otherwise, he wouldn't feel at ease. Meg first lifted a corner of the blinds and looked outside. The sky was just beginning to brighten, and there were no pedestrians on the road. The scuffle at the entrance last night had destroyed the shrubs and several trees that were decades old. The Great Temple would probably send people over to replant them during the day. No one. Could it be a prank? Meg looked around to make sure there was no one hiding in the shrubs not far away. The confusion on his face deepened. He hesitated for a moment before reaching out to open the door. He was still standing in the restaurant when he stuck his head out to look around. His eyes fell on the blacksmith's shop at the side, and he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise, "Boss Mobai, what happened to you?" The blacksmith's shop that used to look normal had been reduced to a pile of rubble. Mobai was sitting in front of the blacksmith's shop with a big hammer in each hand. His face was covered in soot, and at first glance, he looked like a miner who had just come up from the coal mine. He looked very disheveled. "Hee, Mr. Mac, you're awake so early." I accidentally blew up." It's okay. Mobai looked up at Meg when he heard the sound, and smiled awkwardly. "Blew up?" Meg made his way out of the shop, and was greeted by the sight of the smithy that had been razed to the ground. All types of weapons were strewn across the rubble, and even the shop next door had been razed to the ground. Even half of the shop next door had been razed to the ground. The scene could only be described as extremely gruesome. One could only imagine what kind of terrifying explosion had happened just now. Meg's expression became extremely strange. Was this an explosion? This was simply a fucking terrorist attack. How could he be so happy just by being mischievous? Meg looked at Mobai, who was sitting on the rubble with a bashful smile on his face, and suddenly realized where this neighbor of his, who was always up to something big, had gone missing for 2 days. Was he conducting a secret underground nuclear explosion experiment? If Meg's guess was correct, the muffled sound and the shaking of the house were caused by the explosion just now. It was a level 3 attack. If the system hadn't activated the automatic defense mechanism, Mamie's would most likely have collapsed like the shop next to it. At that time, they were still asleep, and the consequences were unimaginable. "Mr. Mobai, it's not very kind of you to do things like this. What if the explosion caused the restaurant to collapse? Even if you want to conduct an experiment, you should at least inform the neighbors first, right?" Meg looked at Mobai with an unpleasant expression and said bluntly. He sympathized and regretted that Mobai's father had been swallowed by the dragon, but this was not a reason for him to conduct an explosion experiment at home. Moreover, before the explosion, Mobai did not inform the neighbors in advance. This attitude of not caring about their lives made him a little uncomfortable. "Cannon," Meg said with certainty. "Cannon?" Mobai was puzzled. "Yes, it's a cannon. It's something that can send that thing to the dragon's side. Meg nodded. Warning. Host, your actions are extremely dangerous. It is very likely to accelerate the development of the Norland continent, and cause this world to develop abnormally. The system's serious voice sounded. System, gunpowder was invented in the Tang dynasty. Although it was used in wars later on, it only truly replaced bows and arrows 1,000 years later. Don't try to pin the title of changing the world on my head. I can't afford to accept it. Meg pursed his lips and continued, furthermore, I didn't invent the gunpowder in this world. That guy came up with TNT right away. I can only look at such a genius and sigh. The system fell silent. Is there really such a thing? What is this cannon? Mulby could not help but take 2 steps forward as he looked at Meg with an excited expression. Meg's words were like pokes at his heart. Cannon. You can think of it as a projectile, but this thing only exists in my imagination now. I'm not sure if it can be used in reality. Meg shook his head with a smile. Then, Mr. Mack, can you tell me more about it? I really need this kind of thing very urgently. If it can really be used, I can pay you a fee. Mulby looked at Meg with an intense gaze. I don't need money. It's just that there have been a lot of troublemakers coming to the restaurant recently. If Boss Mulby can really make a treasure that can kill a giant dragon, can you put one in front of the restaurant to intimidate those troublemakers? Meg smiled as he waved his hand. Mulby was stunned for a moment before he nodded and said, if it can really be made, of course. My idea is not very mature, but perhaps you can use it as a reference. Have a seat in the restaurant first. Meg nodded and turned to walk into the restaurant. Mulby looked down at his dusty clothes and black hands and shook his head and said, I'll leave it for now. I've already asked them to come over and fix the house. I'm so dirty, and the restaurant is going to open soon. I can't delay Mr. Mack's business. It's okay. Come in. The waiters will clean up before they come to work. There are some things that I need to draw for you to understand. Meg pushed the door open and said without looking back. Mulby hesitated for a moment, but still pushed the door open and entered the restaurant. Wash your hands and face first. Meg walked out of the kitchen with a basin of water in his hands, and placed it gently on the table. Thank you. Mulby looked into Meg's eyes. Although Meg had been suppressing his anger before, what he felt now was respect. Meg took away the basin of water that had turned black, and came out with a glass of water, placing it gently in front of Mulby. Then, he placed the pen and paper in his hands on the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. He looked at Mulby with a smile, and said, drink some water. What I'm going to say might be a little complicated, but just listen to me. Anyway, before you can control the stability of the explosives, it's actually too early to make a cannon. Explosives. Mulby sat down, drank a mouthful of water, and looked at Meg in confusion. Meg immediately came back to his senses. There was no such thing as explosives in this world. He smiled and asked, what are you going to call the explosive thing you made today? Now that you mention it, it seems to be a good name to call it explosives. Mulby thought seriously and nodded. Chapter 311. Is this the legendary cannon? Mulby stared at the drawing on the paper for a long while before turning to Mag with a peculiar expression. No matter how he thought about it, he couldn't help but feel that this drawing wasn't very legitimate, and he couldn't think of a way to use it to throw it out. Meg stared at the paper for a while after hearing that. He had not drawn for many years, and had degenerated into a spiritual painter. This cannon was indeed a little hard to say. This is a sketch. Let me draw you a more detailed schematic. Meg turned a page calmly, sat up straight, and started drawing on the paper seriously with the pencil in his hand. Meg drew Mabai a cannon with the simplest schematic. It was almost at the level of the red coat cannon in the late Qing dynasty. It had a large barrel and a front-loading method. The schematic was simple, and it was relatively easy to manufacture. Of course, the most important thing was that Meg did not know much about more advanced cannons. It was really difficult for him to draw a schematic. It was not a problem for him to draw a schematic of a gun. He was familiar with it. However, the difficulty of manufacturing a gun was not comparable to that of an ordinary cannon. The various craftsmanship requirements were extremely high. It was much more difficult to make a gun with a higher lethality than a simple cannon. The right way to start was to start from the basics. After all, he was a man who had a professional background. It was naturally not a problem for him to draw a simple schematic of a cannon when he was serious about it. The schematic of a cannon is actually very simple. However, the lethality mainly depends on the explosive sealed in an airtight iron bowl. The energy released at the moment of explosion determines whether the bomb can kill a giant dragon. As for the specific schematic, Meg explained the schematic of a cannon to Mabai in simple terms as he drew. Mabai's initial doubts gradually turned into trust. His eyes became brighter and his expression became more and more reverent. It was as if the door to a new world had been opened. The specific schematic is roughly like this. The core and most important factor in manufacturing a cannon is the strength of the cannon body. This determines the effective range of the cannon. You are a blacksmith, so you should know this better than me. Meg put down the pen in his hand. On the paper, there were 3 pieces of standard flame-colored paper. Even the manufacturing process was marked in detail. Mr. Mack, you must be a genius. Mabai stared at the blueprint for a while, then looked up at Meg with admiration in his eyes. Meg's culinary skills had already conquered his stomach, so the genius idea that he was showing now completely convinced him. If the explosive that he had unwittingly experimented with was a novel discovery, then Meg's current idea was to put this novel discovery to practical use. Using the huge energy generated by the violent combustion of the gunpowder to propel the projectile into the air, using the semi-enclosed long barrel to create a sealed space, and at the same time, allowing the projectile to have a controllable trajectory. What a genius idea! I'm not a genius. I just know a little bit more. Meg shook his head with a smile. It appeared that Mabai had understood his intentions. As for what kind of cannon he could create, that wasn't something that Meg had to worry about. It would most likely take him a lot of time to create a cannon barrel that met the standards. And before the problem of the stability of the gunpowder was solved, there was no way to proceed. As a man who could make his own bullets, Meg was actually quite knowledgeable about the ratio of gunpowder. However, Mabai's method of adding the powder of magical beast cores to the gunpowder to increase the power of the explosive was simply black technology. This made Meg hold back his urge to make suggestions. Without the restriction of fixed thinking, he might really be able to make a terrifying explosive. After all, this was a different world. Bullets made from ordinary gunpowder might not even be able to penetrate the defenses of ordinary magical beasts. This was also why Meg felt that even if firearms appeared in this world, it would be difficult to change the world. After all, a powerful fire magician was more useful than a cannon. However, the magic crystal gunpowder that Mabai had concocted had given Meg a glimpse of a certain possibility. Regardless of whether it was a powerful bomb or a firearm, perhaps it really could pose a threat to giant dragons after a massive explosion of energy. Mabai put away the 2 pieces of paper on the table, stood up, and looked at Meg solemnly and gratefully. It's a complete casting, and it needs to be able to withstand the previous explosion. It's not a simple thing to make such a cannon body, but I'll do my best to study it. Meg smiled and shook his head, not forgetting to remind Mabai again. You're welcome. However, I still hope that you won't do any explosive experiments at home in the future. Otherwise, living next to you will be a little insecure. According to the principle of gradual courting death, the degree of courting death would gradually increase with each courting death. Meg did not want to be blown up into the sky one day in his sleep. No, I won't. I won't do it in the future. Malbai quickly waved his hand. Boss Malbai. Are you still alive? At this moment, a voice full of energy called out from outside. The people who are repairing the house are here. Mr. Mac, I'll go first. I'm really sorry about today. Malbai looked at the door and said apologetically. Okay. Meg nodded and did not say anything else. After all, they were neighbors, and Malbai was the restaurant's first customer. If it's a magic cannon, it might be very interesting. Meg looked at Malbai's back as he walked out of the door. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Suddenly, he was looking forward to the scene of Malbai pulling a cannon and blasting the giant dragon down from the sky with one shot. After putting away the notebook and cup on the table, Meg turned and walked towards the kitchen. He put on an apron and began to prepare the various ingredients for breakfast. When holding the kitchen knife, Meg felt a slight numbness in his entire right hand, from his fingers to his shoulder. The high-intensity training last night had more or less affected his body, but the benefits were obvious. His body's sensitivity and reaction had increased. After chopping twice, Meg suddenly stopped. He looked at the kitchen knife in his hand and then at the chicken leg on the chopping board. He thought to himself, the thing that I repeat the most every day is chopping and cooking. Every action is repeated thousands of times. If I can integrate sword practice into it, wouldn't I be able to kill two birds with one stone? Chop. Meg took half a step back as he murmured under his breath. He swung the cleaver in his hand, and the chicken leg was severed. The incision was very smooth, and only a shallow cut was left on the chopping board. Not bad, but I need to improve the control of my strength. Meg nodded slightly. The kitchen knife in his hand chopped down again, faster and faster. Under the knife, the chicken was cut into small diamond-shaped cubes. Of course, this ranking had almost become the private ranking of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. Apart from a few long-established companies, the other companies that could enter the top 50 were all members of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. Every month, the competition for the ranking was very intense. This was also a business. These fools cast every vote so seriously, but what's the use? Could it be that being delicious really gave one a high ranking? The current ranking is not the same as it was 20 years ago. Ricky swept his gaze over the expectant customers, and a mocking smile appeared on his face. He raised his chin proudly as he looked at the employees who were anxiously adjusting the statistics. Luther, where do you think that restaurant will rank? Alvin, who was standing aside, gently nudged Luther with his elbow and asked. In my mind, the top 4 should all belong to Mamie's, Luther replied in a soft voice. He paused momentarily before continuing, but it's going to be a little difficult in reality. The size of the restaurant and its attitude toward food have limited his votes. Perhaps 1 or 2 dishes have a chance of making it into the top 50. Making it into the top 50 on the first day. Is it really that good? Alvin was a little surprised. Even though they were employees, even the president didn't know what the results would be until the voting results were tallied. I strongly suggest that you try their rujiamo and sweet tofu pudding. They're a little expensive, but they're definitely worth the price, Luther said with a smile. Alright, when I get my salary this month, I'll definitely go and try something that you and the vice president can't stop praising. Alvin nodded with an expectant look on his face. Vice President Robert very rarely commented on a restaurant's quality, but he had recommended the savory tofu pudding the day before. George, what do you think Mr. Mac's restaurant's ranking will be? In the crowd, Harrison was trying his best to open his eyes as he tried to find Mamie's on the ranking. In terms of deliciousness alone, it should be in the top 5, but this ranking is a little exaggerated, so it's hard to say where it'll rank. Perhaps it'll make it into the top 30, George mused. As veteran foodies in the Aiden Square, they had long since broken away from relying on the ranking to find good food. However, they had cast their votes for Mamie restaurant the day before, so they stopped to take a look today. In any case, the restaurant wouldn't open until 7:30 p.m. After watching the rankings, they would have something to talk about when they lined up later. They weren't the only customers with such thoughts. Even they didn't understand why they cared so much about a restaurant's ranking. Top 30. If it's not in the top 10, I'm going to vote with my feet. George was a little annoyed as he said, the ranking has become more and more unsightly over the years. If you want to find a restaurant with good taste, you have to choose from the top 50 and below. But Mamie's is enough for now. If I were to go to another restaurant, I might not be able to eat it. Don't let the other bosses hear you, or they'll cut you up, George said with a smile. He couldn't help but shake his head as he looked at the restaurants on the ranking. Apart from a few old brands that were indeed good, many of the restaurants at the top of the ranking had only become popular in recent years because of some gimmicks and the ranking. Their taste wasn't even as good as the restaurants below the top 50. It's almost time, someone in the crowd called out at this moment. Everyone reflexively raised their heads and craned their necks to look at the first magic screen. The top 30 dishes and restaurants would appear on the first screen, and the prices of the top 30 dishes for the month would be printed on the first page of the Food Association's recommendation page. A confident smile appeared on Ricky's face. His goal for this month was to reach the 29th position. He had already earned the money, and all he had to do now was bask in the envious gazes and congratulations of others. This was why he had woken up so early to come here. A worker with a serious expression gently pressed a square magic crystal into the groove at the center of a black pillar in front of the magic screen. The blue light shone, and the words on the magic screen flickered a few times before turning black. Then, the red words slowly lit up. 29th place, Mamie's. Braised chicken and rice, 30th place, Mamie's. Loggi Ruggiemo. Two cries of surprise rang out from the crowd. Chapter 314. Boss, the Aiden Square Food Competition Rankings Board had already been updated when we arrived, but... Yabamiya's voice trailed off as she looked at Mag with a hesitant expression. How did it go? Did our food get a good ranking? Meg's eyes lit up as he walked out with 4 servings of tofu pudding in his hands. He turned to Yabamiya with anticipation in his eyes. Although this was only the first day of the ranking battle, the ranking could basically set the tone. Yesterday's turnover was the restaurant's peak. Before he launched a new dish or his strength improved, it would be difficult for him to make another breakthrough in a short period of time. Father's food must be at the top of the list. It must be the best. Amy said confidently as she held Ugly Duckling in her arms. I think there must be something wrong with the rankings. Boss Mag's food is clearly 100 times better than theirs, but... Yabamiya's expression became even more conflicted at the sight of Mag's expectant expression. She clasped her hands together, and looked at Mag with an anxious expression. She wanted to console him, but she didn't know how to phrase her words. Her cheeks immediately blushed, and she didn't know what to say. Sally looked at the conflicted Yabamiya, and said to Meg, braised chicken and rice is ranked 29th, Loggi Ruggiemo is ranked 30th, Yangzhou fried rice is ranked 72nd, sweet tofu pudding is ranked 99th, savory tofu pudding is ranked 100th. These are the rankings of our 5 dishes on the Aiden Square Food Competition Rankings. Sally's expression was also quite conflicted. In her eyes, Meg's food was the best in the world, and such delicious food should be in the top 5 of the Aiden Square food competition rankings. Even the savory tofu pudding, which she had never tasted before, was definitely in the top 5. Yabamiya and Sally both looked at Meg with concern in their eyes. Even they felt that it was a pity, so Meg had to be even more disappointed. It must be very difficult to cook such delicious food without receiving the recognition and respect that it deserved. Father, are you all right? Amy also looked at Meg with concern in her eyes. Is braised chicken and rice really ranked 29th? Richiamo is also in the top 30. Meg's eyes lit up when he heard Sally's words. Yabamiya and Sally turned to Mag with perplexed looks on their faces. They had thought that he would be very sad, but his expression was one of elation and surprise, as if he were very satisfied with his ranking. Yes, this is today's ranking. The next update should be at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Sally nodded. Very good. Since we've achieved such good results on the first day, we need to keep it up. At the very least, we need to keep the braised chicken and rice or Richiamo in the top 30. Meg nodded in satisfaction. He wasn't pretending to be surprised. He knew more about the Aiden Square food ranking than Sally and the others. It was a ranking that relied on a combination of all kinds of data. Delicious food alone wasn't enough. Without enough customers, even if all the customers gave a 5-star rating, it would still be very difficult for a restaurant to reach the top. Compared to the larger restaurants, Mamie Restaurant was still able to provide far less food and serve far fewer customers on a daily basis. It was already beyond his expectations that 2 of its dishes would be able to make it into the top 30. Even though it barely made the cut, Mag didn't care about anything else as long as he could complete the system's top 30 mission. Yabamiya and Sally opened their mouths. They still couldn't understand why Meg wasn't angry. Instead, he seemed to be pleasantly surprised. Sit down and have breakfast. In view of your excellent performance, from today onward, you'll be provided an extra serving of tofu pudding as your daily meal. Meg didn't explain. He put the tofu pudding on the table one by one and smiled at them. What else would you like for breakfast? I want a Richiamo. Yabamiya raised her hand. I want a plate of Yangzhou fried rice, Sally said expectantly. Okay, please wait a moment. Meg nodded with a smile. He turned around and walked to the kitchen. Sally and Yabamiya looked at each other with happiness in their eyes. There was nothing happier than being able to eat delicious tofu pudding and the food they liked early in the morning. There's water in the back of the room. Wash up yourself. At the entrance of the magic potion shop, Julian was holding a handful of grains and playing with charcoal. He didn't even turn his head when he heard the footsteps behind him. His voice was so hoarse that it sounded like a demon that had just crawled out of hell. Thank you for saving us. Cece and Lulu stood still and bowed deeply to Julian at the same time. You're druids. Urian slowly turned around and looked at the 2 of them with a deep gaze as he spoke in a firm voice. Cece and Lulu's expressions changed at the same time. Lulu took half a step forward subconsciously and shielded Cece behind her. She looked at Julian nervously. Don't be nervous, little ones. I'm not a good person, but I'm not a bad person either. Julian threw the grains back into the small jar. He sat down on a decked chair and looked at them with narrowed eyes. What's the relationship between you and Fariadin? Great Druid. Do you know Master Fariadin? Cece's eyes lit up. She walked out from behind Lulu and asked in surprise. A hint of surprise also appeared on Lulu's face, but he was still looking at Urian with a wary expression. They were the only 2 druids left on the entire Norland continent, so there were very few people who could identify them, and even fewer who knew the names of the great druids. Yes. When that old guy was dying, he asked me to help him find 2 little ones. He said that the hope of reviving the druids lay in those 2 little ones. Since the world tree is with you, it seems that those 2 little ones are you. Julian nodded slightly as he looked at Cece. Cece and Lulu's expressions changed slightly again. They were already very surprised that they were recognized as druids. The world tree was the only hope of reviving the night elves, and they had never mentioned it to anyone. This is what Fariadin gave me. He asked me to give it to you. Julian reached out and took a palm-sized green square box from a shelf. He gestured for Cece to take it and calmly said, "I'm Julian. Perhaps you've heard of my name. Lord of Ice Julian." Only her neck and hands were exposed, as if she was wearing a colorful dress. Cece closed her eyes, and could clearly sense that there was a connection between her and the quicksand world that was slowly forming. The world tree slowly flew toward the box, and then took root on the box. Its roots grew at a rate that was discernible to the naked eye, and grabbed onto the box like a series of tentacles. The small tree with yellow branches and leaves took root on an old green wooden box. The 7-colored sand swirled around it. Everything looked strange, but strangely harmonious. Lulu was a little nervous as he looked at Cece from the side, but he didn't say anything. This was a kind of inheritance, the inheritance of a great druid. Inheriting a world was a special inheritance of the night elves. Only the most honorable great druids could receive this inheritance. This process lasted for about half an hour. Julian pursed his lips and walked out of the shop as he said, "Since you're fine now, you can start working today. This breakfast is on me. Is it Mamie's?" "Thank you, Master Julian." Cece's face lit up at the mention of food. She didn't say anything else about the commission, and quickly followed him out of the door. There was already a long line outside the restaurant. Compared to a few days ago, the smell of gunpowder between the sweet and savory factions was especially strong this morning. Many people were arguing with each other, and even their sleeves were rolled up. It was as if they would explode at any moment. Heretics who eat sweet tofu pudding. I'm warning you, stop giving 1-star ratings to the savory tofu pudding as soon as possible. Don't you feel guilty for doing such a thing? Humph. It's the savory faction that should reflect on themselves. Sweet tofu pudding's dignity is not to be insulted. The 99th ranking is shocking. Women will cry if they hear it, and men will fall silent if they hear it. Draw your sword, heretics. Someone in the crowd let out an angry roar. Clank. 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 You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.